The night my son threw me out of his house, I didn't argue. I didn't remind him how many times I had sacrificed for him. I simply picked up my suitcase and walked out. But before I tell you what happened after that night, you need to understand something. My son hadn't always hated having me around. There was a time when Daniel used to tell everyone that I was his hero. He was 6 years old when he first said it. I remember the day clearly. He had fallen off his bicycle and scraped his knee badly. He was sitting on the sidewalk, crying so hard he could barely breathe. I picked him up, carried him inside, cleaned the wound, and put a bandage over it. He looked at me with those big brown eyes and whispered, "Dad, yes, buddy, when I grow up, I'm going to take care of you." I smiled. "You don't have to take care of me." "Yes, I do." He sniffed. "Because you're my dad." I laughed and hugged him. I didn't know then how much those words would mean to me years later, because somewhere along the way, my little boy disappeared. And the man who replaced him seemed to forget everything we had been through. But the change didn't happen overnight. That's what makes what happened so difficult to explain. Daniel didn't wake up one morning and decide he didn't love me. It happened slowly, so slowly that I kept making excuses for him. He was busy, he was stressed. He had a wife now, he had children. He was building his career. I told myself all those things because the alternative was too painful. The truth was much simpler. My son had started believing that I was standing in the way of the life he wanted, and I didn't realize it until it was almost too late. After my wife, Margaret, died, Daniel was the one who insisted I move in with him. "Dad, you're not staying alone." I remember sitting across from him at my kitchen table. "I'll be fine." "No, you won't." "Daniel, no." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You raised me. Let me do something for you now." Those words nearly broke me. I had spent 35 years working, raising him, paying bills, fixing things around the house, and trying to give him opportunities I never had. When he said that, I thought maybe life was finally giving something back. So I sold my small house, I packed what little I had, and I moved into Daniel's home. At first, everything was wonderful. His wife, Melissa, was polite. His 2 children called me Grandpa. Daniel would come home from work and sit beside me. Sometimes we'd watch baseball together. Sometimes we'd talk until midnight. For the first time since Margaret died, I didn't feel completely alone. But then something changed. It started with small things. "Dad, could you keep the television down?" "Dad, can you move your shoes?" "Dad, please don't leave your coffee cup there." Nothing terrible, nothing I couldn't handle. Then the comments became different. "You're here all day anyway. Can't you help more? You're retired, Dad. You have plenty of time. Do you really need to use the car again?" I tried not to notice. I told myself Daniel was simply stressed. His business wasn't doing as well as he'd hoped. Melissa wanted a bigger house. Their expenses were growing. They had children to raise. I understood, so I started making myself smaller. I stopped watching television during the day. I stayed mostly in my room. I cooked dinner whenever I could. I repaired things around the house. I watched the kids when they needed someone. I even started paying for groceries from my savings. I never complained. But apparently, even that wasn't enough. One evening, Daniel came home and found me sitting in the living room. He looked at me, then at the television, then back at me. "Dad, yeah, can we talk?" I knew from his voice that something was wrong. "Of course." He sat across from me. Melissa was standing in the kitchen. I could see her listening. Daniel lowered his voice. "Things have been tight lately." "I know. And having another person in the house isn't exactly helping." I stared at him. "I can contribute more." "That's not what I mean." "Then what do you mean?" He sighed. "It's just, this isn't the arrangement I expected." I felt something tighten in my chest. "I thought you wanted me here." "I did." "Then what changed?" Daniel didn't answer. Melissa did. "What changed is that this house has become uncomfortable." I looked at her. "Uncomfortable?" She shrugged. "Daniel and I don't have any privacy anymore." I looked at my son. He didn't defend me. That hurt more than her words. I nodded slowly. "All right." Daniel immediately said, "Dad, that's not what we're saying." But it was. I knew it. And so did he. A few weeks later, things became even worse. Daniel had started entertaining business clients at home. I understood that. So I stayed upstairs whenever guests came over. One Friday evening, I heard laughter downstairs. I recognized some of the voices. Business associates, friends, people Daniel wanted to impress. I decided to stay in my room. Then I heard Melissa say something that made me stop. "Just don't let him come downstairs." There was laughter. Then Daniel said, He knows better. I sat on the edge of my bed. My hands were trembling. I wanted to believe I had heard wrong. Then one of the guests asked, "Who?" Melissa laughed. Someone chuckled. "Does he live here?" "Yes." Another voice said, "That must be awkward." Melissa answered, "You have no idea." More laughter. I sat there staring at the wall. I could have gone downstairs. I could have confronted them. But I didn't, because a part of me was still protecting Daniel. I kept thinking, maybe he's embarrassed, maybe he's under pressure, maybe tomorrow he'll apologize. Tomorrow came, no apology. Instead, Daniel walked into the kitchen while I was making coffee. "Dad," I turned. "Morning." He looked uncomfortable. "About last night, I waited. I didn't know you were awake." I almost smiled. "So you knew what was being said?" He didn't answer. That was answer enough. "Daniel, am I embarrassing you?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "It's complicated." "No." I looked directly at him. "It's not complicated." He looked away. "You're my father." "Yes, and I love you." I wanted to believe him, but then he said, "Things just have to change." That sentence stayed with me, because I knew what it meant. Something was coming, I just didn't know how soon. 3 months later, Daniel hosted a dinner. It was a big one. At least 15 people were coming. Business partners, neighbors, friends. Melissa had spent the entire afternoon preparing. The house smelled like roasted meat and garlic. There were expensive bottles of wine on the counter. Daniel was dressed in a suit. I stayed upstairs. Then, around 7:30, someone knocked on my door. It was Daniel. "Dad, yes? Can you do me a favor?" "Of course, stay upstairs tonight." I stared at him. "What?" "Just until everyone leaves." I felt my stomach drop. "Why?" He hesitated. "Because these are important people." I looked at him for a long moment. "Am I not important?" He sighed. "Dad, don't start. I asked you a question." He lowered his voice. "I just don't want people asking questions." "What kind of questions?" He didn't answer. I nodded. "All right." He walked away. I closed the door. And for the first time, I realized something. I wasn't living with my son anymore. I was hiding in his house. About an hour later, I heard someone laughing loudly downstairs. Then I heard my name. I froze. Someone said, "Wait, your father actually lives here." Daniel laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, where is Des?" Another person laughed. "Seriously," Melissa said. "He basically lives off Daniel." My heart sank. Daniel didn't correct her. Instead, I heard him say, "It's temporary." That word hurt. I had sold my home, given up my independence, moved into his house because he told me I was family. And now I was temporary. I sat on my bed for almost 20 minutes. Then I heard footsteps coming upstairs. The door opened. Daniel walked in. His face was red. He had been drinking. "Dad," I stood. "What? Why did you come downstairs?" "I didn't." He pointed toward the hallway. "Then why were you talking to Mr. Collins?" "I wasn't." He stared at me. Then I realized what had happened. One of the guests must have come upstairs looking for the bathroom. He had seen me. I hadn't even spoken to him. But Daniel was angry. "You couldn't just stay upstairs." "That's not the point." His voice shook the walls. I stared at my son. He had never spoken to me like that before. "Daniel," I said, "you're embarrassing yourself." He went silent. Then he said something I will never forget. "You know what, Dad?" "What? Maybe you should leave." I thought I had misheard him. "What, you heard me?" I took one step toward him. "Daniel, you're angry." "No." He shook his head. "I've been thinking about this for months." My heart started pounding. "Thinking about what?" "You can't stay here anymore." I looked at him, then toward the door. "Tonight?" "Yes." I couldn't believe it. "Where am I supposed to go?" He shrugged. "I don't know." "You're throwing your father out?" His face hardened. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I stared at him. Then I noticed something behind him. Melissa was standing in the hallway. She had been listening. She didn't look surprised. Understood this wasn't Daniel's decision alone. They had discussed this, planned it, maybe even rehearsed it. I looked back at my son. "Is this what you want?" He hesitated. That tiny hesitation gave me hope, just for a second. Then he said, "Yes." My hope disappeared. I walked to my closet, pulled out my old brown suitcase, and started packing. Daniel stood in the doorway. He didn't help. He didn't apologize. He just watched. When I finished, I picked up the suitcase. As I passed him, I stopped. "Do you remember what you told me when you were 6? He frowned. "No. You said you'd take care of me when you grew up." He looked down. I nodded. I remembered. Then I walked past him, down the stairs, through the living room filled with his guests. Every conversation stopped. People stared. Nobody knew what to say. I could feel my face burning. But I kept walking. I opened the front door, then Daniel said something behind me. "Dad." I stopped. I turned around. For one foolish second I thought he was going to apologize. Instead he said, "Don't make me regret this." I looked at my son and something inside me finally went quiet. I nodded. "You won't." Then I stepped outside. The door closed behind me, and I stood on the sidewalk with one suitcase, 1,800 tifus in my bank account, and absolutely no idea where my life was going next. But there was something Daniel didn't know, something I had never told him, something hidden inside that old suitcase, and by the following morning, that secret would send me down a path that would change everything forever. The door closed behind me. I stood there for several seconds, staring at the house where I had once believed I belonged. The lights from the dinner were still glowing through the windows. I could hear muffled voices inside. People were still eating, still laughing, still living their lives. While I stood outside with one suitcase, I didn't cry. Not yet. Maybe my mind simply hadn't caught up with what had happened. I started walking. The rain had stopped, but the sidewalk was wet, and every few steps my shoes made a quiet splash against the pavement. I had nowhere to go. That was the humiliating part. I had no home because I had sold it after Daniel promised I would always have a place with him. I had no hotel reservation. No friend waiting for me. No brother or sister I could call. My wife was gone, my parents were gone, and my only child had just told me to leave. I walked nearly 6 blocks before I finally stopped outside a 24-hour diner. I looked through the window. People were sitting inside drinking coffee. A couple was laughing in a corner. A truck driver was eating pancakes. Everyone looked normal. Nobody knew that my entire life had just fallen apart. I opened the door. The waitress looked at my suitcase, then at me. "Long night?" I almost smiled. "You could say that." She pointed toward a booth. "Coffee?" "Yes." I sat down. For the first time that night I allowed myself to look at the suitcase. It was old, brown leather. The corners were worn. One of the buckles was slightly bent. Daniel had seen it hundreds of times. He had never asked what was inside. And perhaps that was because the suitcase contained something I had kept private for almost 40 years. I opened it. Most of the clothes were still there. A few shirts, 2 pairs of pants, my shaving kit, a framed photograph of Margaret, and underneath the clothes was a small black notebook. I took it out. I placed it on the table. My hands rested on the cover. For a moment, I didn't open it. That notebook represented a life I had almost forgotten. A life before Daniel, before married bills, before responsibility. I finally opened it. The first page had a date written in my handwriting, June 14, 1984. Below it were 5 words, "One day I will build it." I stared at the sentence. Then I laughed quietly. It was almost absurd. A dream from 40 years ago. A dream I had abandoned. A dream Daniel had never heard about. When I was 24, I worked at a manufacturing plant. I wasn't an executive. I wasn't wealthy. I was just a young maintenance technician who loved understanding how machines worked. I could hear a machine running, and often tell what was wrong before anyone else could. Back then, I had an idea. Factories were losing enormous amounts of money because equipment wasn't being maintained properly. Machines would fail. Production would stop. Workers would wait. Managers would panic. And companies would spend thousands replacing equipment that could have been repaired for a fraction of the cost. I wanted to build a company that would specialize in preventing those breakdowns, not just fixing machines after they broke, preventing them from breaking in the first place. I had even sketched the business model in that notebook. But life got in the way. I married Margaret, then Daniel was born. There were bills, a mortgage, school expenses, medical costs. Every time I thought about starting the business, I told myself, maybe next year. Then Daniel got older, and next year became 10 years, then 20, then 30, until eventually I stopped thinking about it altogether. Or at least I thought I had. But that night in the diner, looking at those old pages, something changed. I wasn't thinking about Daniel anymore. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I wasn't thinking about proving him wrong. I was thinking about the one dream I had abandoned for everyone else. Maybe it wasn't. Waitress returned with my coffee. "You okay?" I looked up. "Yes." She glanced at the notebook. "Writing a book?" "No." I closed it. "Just remembering something." She smiled. "Sometimes that's the best reason to write." Then she walked away. I sat there until nearly 4 in the morning. At 4:17 I made a decision. I would not call Daniel. I would not ask him for money. I would not ask him for a place to sleep. I would build something, even if I failed, even if it took years, even if I had to start at 62. I would build something that belonged to me. At 5:02, I closed the notebook, and I wrote a new sentence beneath the old one. This time I won't wait. The next morning I rented the cheapest room I could find. It wasn't much. A tiny room above an old hardware store. The wallpaper was peeling. The window didn't close properly. The bed squeaked every time I moved, but it was mine. Nobody could tell me I was a burden there. Nobody could tell me to hide upstairs when guests arrived. Nobody could make me feel like I was occupying space I hadn't earned. That first morning, I sat on the edge of the bed and calculated my money. 1,842 rent, food, transportation, and business registration equipment. I realized something immediately. I couldn't afford to make mistakes, so I started with what I had, my experience, my hands, and that old notebook. I spent the next 2 weeks looking for work, not because I had abandoned my plan, because I needed money to fund it. At 62, getting hired was harder than I expected. One company told me I was overqualified. Another told me they wanted someone who could stay with them for many years. A manager actually looked at my age before asking my name. I walked out without saying anything. That evening I sat alone in my room. For the first time, doubt entered my mind. Maybe Daniel was right. Maybe I was too old. Maybe I really was a burden. Maybe my best years were behind me. I opened the notebook. The old sentence stared back at me. One day I will build it. I almost tore the page out. Then I remembered something Margaret used to tell me. She always said, getting older doesn't make you useless. It just means you've survived more things. I closed my eyes. Then I opened the notebook again. I wrote, age is not the problem, fear is. The next morning I stopped looking for a normal job. I started looking for customers. My first target was a small company called Westbrook Manufacturing. I had never met the owner. I simply walked into their office carrying my old tool bag. The receptionist looked at me. Can I help you? I'd like to speak with whoever handles equipment maintenance. Do you have an appointment? No. She gave me the kind of look people give when they already know the answer. Then I'm afraid you can't. I smiled. Could you at least have my card? She glanced at it. Carter Industrial Maintenance? Yes. You're a company? I am. She looked behind me. There was nobody else. You're the company? I laughed. For now. She smiled despite herself. Leave the card. Then I walked out. Nothing happened for 3 days. Then my phone rang. Mr. Carter? Yes? This is Westbrook Manufacturing. My heart started beating faster. We have a machine that's been giving us trouble. What kind? A hydraulic press. What's it doing? Overheating. How long? 2 weeks. Have you replaced the cooling unit? Yes. Changed the fluid? Yes. Checked the pump? Yes. I paused. Have you checked the pressure regulator? Silence. No, don't replace anything yet. Why? Because I don't think the cooling system is your problem. The manager hesitated. What do you think it is? I need to see the machine. Another pause. Then, how soon can you come? Today. I arrived 20 minutes later. The machine was enormous. Several technicians were standing around it. The manager pointed. That's our problem. I walked around the machine. I listened. I watched. I touched the housing. Then I asked them to start it. The sound was wrong, very slightly. Almost impossible to notice. I shut my eyes. The vibration wasn't coming from the pump. It was coming from a misaligned shaft. I pointed. That's your problem. The manager frowned. Our technician checked that. Check it again. He did. Then he stopped. It's off by almost 3 millimeters. I nodded. That misalignment is forcing the pump to work harder. You're generating excess heat. The manager stared at me. How much would a new pump cost? Probably 15 to 20,000. And the repair? Maybe 800. He looked at me, then at the machine, then back at me. You're hired. That sentence changed my life. I worked for 12 hours. By midnight, the machine was running perfectly. The manager shook my hand. I don't know where you came from, Mr. Carter. I'm local, I mean. He looked at my gray hair. You should have been doing this years ago. I smiled. I was. He laughed. Then he asked, can you maintain the rest of our equipment? I said yes. The next morning he signed a 3-month contract. It wasn't a huge contract, but it was mine. My first customer. My first proof that the dream in that old notebook wasn't dead. 3 months later, I had 4 customers. 6 months later, I had 9. I worked, I ate cheap meals. I slept little. And every time someone asked why a 62-year-old man was working so hard, I gave the same answer. I have something to prove. But that wasn't completely true. I didn't need to prove anything to Daniel anymore. What I really wanted was to prove something to myself, that I wasn't finished, that my life hadn't ended the night my son threw me out. It had only changed direction. One evening, almost a year after leaving Daniel's house, I received a phone call I almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar. "Hello." There was silence, then a woman's voice. "Is this Robert Carter?" "Yes, I'm calling from Daniel's office." My stomach tightened. "Why?" "There's been a problem with his company." I sat down. "What kind of problem?" She hesitated. "I was told not to discuss it with you." "Then why did you call?" Another silence. Then she said something that I wasn't prepared to hear. "Because I think you should know." My hand tightened around the phone. "What?" "Daniel's business is in serious trouble." I closed my eyes. For a moment I remembered the night he had thrown me out. Then I remembered the boy on the bicycle, the little boy who had once promised to take care of me. I didn't know what was going to happen next. But I knew one thing: whatever was happening to Daniel was only the beginning, because somewhere inside his failing company was a decision he had made months earlier. A decision that would eventually cost him almost everything, and I wouldn't learn what that decision was until much later. When I finally did, I understood why my son had come looking for me. The woman on the phone didn't say anything for several seconds. I could hear papers moving in the background, then she finally spoke. "Mr. Carter, I probably shouldn't have called you." "Then why did you?" "Because Daniel won't listen to anyone." I leaned back in my chair. "What's wrong with his company?" "He's losing contracts." "How many?" "3 major ones in the last 6 months." I frowned. Daniel had always been good at business. Not because he was particularly patient or careful, but because he was confident, sometimes too confident. What happened? He took on a project that was much larger than anything he'd handled before, and he borrowed heavily to finance it. I stared at the wall. Why would he do that? She hesitated. Because he wanted to prove something. My stomach tightened. To whom? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I already knew. After the call ended, I sat alone in my office. My company occupied only 2 rooms above a warehouse at that time. There were 8 employees, a whiteboard covered with maintenance schedules, 3 old computers, a coffee machine that worked only when it felt like it. It wasn't impressive, but it was mine. Everything in that office represented something I had built with my own hands. I looked at the framed photograph of Margaret on my desk. "I don't know what to do," I whispered. She couldn't answer, of course. But I remembered what she used to say whenever Daniel made a mistake as a child. Let him learn. I wondered if that was what I needed to do now. Let Daniel learn. Not rescue him. Not punish him. Just let him face the consequences of his choices. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about the call. The woman had said something else. Something that stayed with me. Daniel wouldn't listen. That sounded exactly like the son who had stood in my hallway years earlier and told me I was the problem. Maybe some people had to lose everything before they finally understood what mattered. I just didn't know how much Daniel was about to lose. The next morning, I arrived at the office before everyone else. There was a stack of invoices on my desk. Payroll was due in 9 days. We had 2 customers waiting for equipment inspections, and 1 major client had just called to complain about a missed appointment. I picked up the phone. "Good morning." The voice on the other end was angry. "You promised someone would be here yesterday." "I know. My production line was down for 6 hours. I apologize." "An apology doesn't fix the money we lost." He hung up. I sat there staring at the receiver. For the first time since starting my company, I felt the pressure. It wasn't enough to work hard. It wasn't enough to know machines. I had employees depending on me, customers depending on me, bills, insurance, taxes. One mistake could bring everything down. That afternoon, I called a meeting. 8 employees sat around the table. I looked at them. Nobody spoke. I took on too many jobs at once. One of my technicians, Mike, leaned forward. "What do you want us to do?" "Slow down." He looked surprised. "Slow down, yes. We'll lose customers, maybe. But I'd rather lose 1 customer than lose the company." The room became quiet. That decision would later become one of the most important decisions I ever made. But at the time, I had no idea. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. A large manufacturing company contacted us. They wanted a full maintenance contract. It was worth more than all our existing contracts combined. I couldn't believe it. The manager invited me to his office. He slid a folder across the desk. "We've heard good things about you." I opened it. Thank you. We want you to take over preventative maintenance for our entire facility. I looked at the numbers. It was enormous, bigger than anything I had ever handled. How soon do you need an answer? Friday. I closed the folder. I'll have an answer tomorrow. He smiled. Good. I walked out of the building. My hands were shaking. This was it, the opportunity I had been waiting for. The kind of contract that could change everything. But there was one problem. We weren't ready. Not yet. That evening I called my accountant. I told him about the contract. He listened carefully, then asked, "How much would you need to expand?" I gave him the number. He was silent. "Robert, that's a lot of money." "I know. You'd need another 6 technicians." "I know. New equipment." "I know. Vehicles." "I know. And you'd probably have to take out a loan." I looked at the old notebook sitting beside me. For years I had dreamed about building a company. Now the dream was standing in front of me. But dreams don't come with guarantees. Neither do businesses. "What would you do?" I asked. He said, "I'd walk away." I stared at the phone. "Why?" "Because if you fail, you'll lose everything." I looked around my office. I had already lost almost everything once. But this time, people were depending on me. So I did something I had never done before. I didn't make the decision alone. I asked my employees. The next morning I called everyone together. I explained the opportunity. Then I told them the risks. Mike looked at me. "You've spent your whole life fixing other people's problems." I smiled. "What does that have to do with this?" He shrugged. "Maybe it's time you fix your own." Everyone laughed, but then he became serious. "Take the contract." Another employee nodded, then another. By the end of the meeting, every person in the room had voted yes. I signed the contract, and for the next 6 months, we worked harder than we had ever worked before. The company grew. 10 employees became 18. 18 became 31. We moved into a real office, bought new service vehicles, hired engineers, built a scheduling department. For the first time in my life, I was no longer simply working for a living. I was creating something that could outlive me. And then came the first article. A local business magazine published a short story about our company. The headline read, 62-year-old entrepreneur builds fast-growing maintenance firm from scratch. My secretary brought me the magazine. "Congratulations." I laughed. "Entrepreneur? You are." I looked at the photograph. It was the first time I saw myself differently. Not as an old man who had been thrown out of his son's house. Not as a widower. Not as someone starting over. But as a businessman, a founder, a man who had survived. I kept the magazine. I didn't send it to Daniel. I didn't want him to know. Not because I wanted to hurt him. Because I didn't want my success to become another weapon in our relationship. I wanted him to succeed or fail without thinking about me. But apparently, life had other plans. One Monday morning I received an email. The subject line was, "Private." Daniel Carter. I stared at the screen. My heart began pounding. I hadn't spoken to Daniel in almost 2 years. I opened it. There were only 3 sentences. "Dad, I know what you've been doing. We need to talk." I read it again, then again. My secretary knocked on the door. "Everything okay?" I closed the laptop. "Yes." She walked away. I opened the email again. There was something strange about it. Daniel didn't say he was sorry. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask me to come home. He simply said, "We need to talk." I wondered what he knew. Then another thought entered my mind. How had he found out? I had never advertised my personal connection to the company. My employees didn't know much about my family. I hadn't spoken about Daniel. So how had he discovered what I was building? That question bothered me all day, until, at 4:30 that afternoon, I received another email. This one was from my accountant. The subject line made my stomach drop. Urgent. A possible conflict of interest. I opened it. And the first sentence made absolutely no sense. It said, "One of the companies attempting to purchase our services is connected to your son." I read the sentence twice, then I leaned back in my chair. Daniel wasn't just in trouble. His failing business was somehow moving directly into mine. And I had no idea whether that was an accident, or whether my son had come looking for me for a reason. The next morning, Daniel appeared outside my office. He wasn't alone. A man in an expensive suit stood beside him. I recognized the man immediately. It was Michael Grant, Daniel's former business partner, the same man whose name had appeared in several documents connected to Daniel's collapsing company. I stood when they entered. "Dad." Michael extended his hand. "Mr. Carter." I didn't take it. "What do you want?" Daniel looked at Michael, then back at me. "There's something you need to know." I sat down. "Go ahead." Daniel swallowed. My company is in serious trouble. I heard his face changed. You knew. Someone called me. He looked angry for a moment. I didn't ask them to. I know. Michael finally spoke. We have a proposal. I looked at him. For what? He placed a folder on my desk. I opened it. My eyes moved across the first page. Then the second. Then the third. I looked up slowly. You want me to buy Daniel's company? Daniel's eyes filled with shame. No, Michael interrupted. Not exactly. I looked back at the folder. There was another document underneath, a merger proposal. A partnership, a transfer of assets. And buried in the middle was one sentence that made my blood run cold. Daniel would retain executive control. Daniel stared at me. Dad. No. You haven't even heard me. I've heard enough. Michael leaned forward. You're making a mistake. I looked at him. Maybe then. I looked at my son. Daniel, when you threw me out, you made it very clear that you didn't need me. He lowered his eyes. I know. You made your choice. I know. So why are you here? Daniel finally looked at me, and for the first time I saw something in his face that I had never seen before. Fear, not anger, not pride, fear, because I'm running out of options. I nodded. I understand. He looked relieved. Then I said, but I still won't buy your company. His face fell. Michael stood. This is your last chance. I looked at him. No, he gathered the papers. Then you'll regret it. He walked out. Daniel remained seated. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, Dad, I never thought I'd be sitting here asking you for help. I looked at him. You once told me I was a burden. His face tightened. I know, you told me to leave. I know, and now you're asking me to save your company. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. I know. I leaned back. Then tell me the truth. He looked confused. What truth? Why is your company actually failing? He went completely silent. That silence told me more than any answer could have. I waited. Finally, Daniel whispered, because I made a deal. What deal? He looked toward Michael. What kind of deal? Daniel's voice dropped. A deal that I thought would make me rich. I stared at him. And what happened? He looked down. Michael didn't just take my money. He paused. He took something else. What? Daniel looked directly into my eyes. My company. I felt a chill run through me. And suddenly the pieces began falling into place, the failing contracts. The missing money, the debt, Michael's involvement, Daniel's desperation. But there was still one question I couldn't answer. Why had Michael brought Daniel to me? What did he actually want from my company? And why did I have a feeling that Daniel's collapse had never been an accident? Daniel sat across from me without saying a word. For the first time since he had walked into my office, he didn't look like a successful businessman I remembered. He looked like my son. The same boy who used to sit at our kitchen table doing homework while Margaret cooked dinner. The same boy who once fell asleep on my shoulder during a baseball game. But there was something else in his face now. Fear, real fear. I closed the folder Michael had left behind. Daniel swallowed. There's nothing you can do. That wasn't my question. He looked down. Tell me what happened. For almost a minute he didn't speak. Then he finally said, I trusted him. Daniel nodded. He approached me about 18 months ago. What did he want? He said he could take my company to another level. I leaned back. How? He had investors. And you believed him? Yes, I stared at my son. That answer sounded too simple. Why? Daniel looked embarrassed. Because he made me feel like I was finally becoming somebody. I didn't respond, he continued. He showed me numbers, contracts, future projects. He told me my company could be worth 10 times what it was. And you wanted that? Yes. How much did you borrow? Daniel hesitated. Almost $2 million. I closed my eyes. $2 million. For a company his size, that wasn't ambitious. It was dangerous. What did you use the money for? Expansion. Everything. New equipment? Yes. Employees? Yes. Buildings? Yes. And the rest? He didn't answer. I looked at him. Daniel. He finally whispered. Michael convinced me to move some of the money through another company. What company? His. I felt something cold move through my chest. And you signed the documents? Yes. Without your lawyer. My lawyer reviewed the first agreement. The first. Daniel looked away. There were amendments. How many? 3, and you signed all of them? Yes. I slowly shook my head. Why? He looked at me. I thought I was building something bigger. I almost told him that this was exactly what pride did. It made you believe you were too smart to fail. But I didn't. I had already learned something important during my own journey. People don't listen when they are desperate to prove themselves. Daniel pulled a document from his briefcase. This is what I signed. I read it, then I read it again. The language was complicated, but one section stood out. Michael's investment company had secured rights to a large portion of Daniel's business assets. If Daniel defaulted on the loan, Michael could take control. I looked up. When did you realize this? 3 months ago. And you didn't tell anyone. I thought I could fix it. How? Daniel laughed bitterly. I took another loan. I stared at him. You borrowed more money to cover the first loan? Yes. From whom? He didn't answer. I didn't need him to. Michael? Daniel nodded. I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, my employees were moving between service vehicles. My company was growing. My life was stable. But suddenly I realized how easily it could all disappear. One bad decision, one dishonest partner, one signature. That was all it took. I turned around. Daniel, you need a lawyer. I know. A good one. I can't afford one. Then sell something. I don't have anything left. I stared at him. That sentence carried more weight than he probably realized. A few years earlier, he had everything. A house, a business, a wife, children, money. And he had believed I was the burden. Now he had nothing. But I still wasn't going to humiliate him. Not because he deserved kindness, because I didn't want to become the kind of person he had once been. Where is Melissa? I asked. Daniel's expression changed. She left. When? 6 months ago. Why? He laughed. 'Cause she said she didn't sign up for this. I looked at him. And the kids? I see them every other weekend. Do they know? No. About the business? He shook his head. They think I'm still working. I nodded. What about your house? Gone. Your car sold. Your savings? Gone. I sat back down. So what do you have? Daniel looked at me. Nothing. The word was barely audible. I looked at my son for a long time. Then I said something he wasn't expecting. Good. His eyes widened. What? Now you know what it feels like to have nothing. His face hardened. For a second I saw the old Daniel, the proud one, the angry one. Then I continued. Not because I want you to suffer. He relaxed slightly. But because sometimes losing everything is the only way a person finally understands what he was taking for granted. Daniel looked down. I know. No, I said quietly. You're beginning to know. That evening, after Daniel left, I stayed in my office. I opened the old notebook. The first page still contained those 5 words. One day, I will build it. I turned the page. There were sketches of machines, ideas, numbers, plans. A younger version of me had believed success was about money. Now I understood successes was being able to sleep at night, knowing you hadn't destroyed someone else to get where you were. I closed the notebook. Then my phone rang. It was my lawyer. Robert, I need to talk to you. What happened? I reviewed the documents Daniel gave you. And there was a pause. Something doesn't make sense. What? Michael's company isn't just trying to control Daniel's business. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? The same investment company appears in documents connected to another company. He hesitated. Yours, I stood. What? Robert, someone has been trying to purchase one of your smaller suppliers. Who? An investment group connected to Michael Grant. I stared at the wall. Why would Michael want one of my suppliers? I don't know. Could it be competition? Maybe. But the timing is strange. How strange? He began acquiring interests in companies connected to your supply chain shortly after your company started expanding. I felt a chill. How long? About 18 months. The same time, Michael approached Daniel. I sat down slowly. Are you saying he planned this? I don't know. I already started. What did you find? Another pause. Robert, I found something else. What? The company that Michael used to invest in Daniel's business was registered only 4 months before he approached your son. I closed my eyes. 4 months. A newly created company. Millions of dollars. A failing business. And now an attempt to reach my company through my suppliers. This was no longer just Daniel's mistake. Something much bigger was happening. The next morning I asked my lawyer to investigate everything. Bank transfers, company registrations, contracts, investment records, purchases. I wanted to know who Michael really was. 3 days later, he came back to me. Robert, you need to sit down. I was already sitting. What did you find? He placed a thick file on my desk. Michael Grant has been involved in 6 companies over the last 5 years. And 5 of them collapsed. I frowned. What happened to the owners? They lost control. Who gained control? Michael's investment group. I looked at the file. So he finds struggling companies, gives them money, takes control, and then dismantles them. That's what it appears. I felt sick. And Daniel was supposed to be the next one. I looked at the documents, then something caught my eye. A company name. I recognized it. It was one of the businesses that had recently contacted my company. I pointed. What's this? My lawyer looked. That company? Yes. It's one of Michael's. I stared at him. Why would they want to hire us? He shook his head. I don't know. I opened another document. There it was. A maintenance contract. My company was being offered an enormous amount of money to service several facilities. The contract looked legitimate, but now I knew who was behind it. I felt something was wrong, very wrong. I told my lawyer to investigate before we signed anything. 2 days later, he called me. His voice sounded different. Robert, don't sign that contract. Why? Because the facilities don't actually belong to the company listed in the agreement. I froze. Who owns them? Michael. So he wants my company to service his facilities. Yes, why? He may be trying to gain access to your operations. I stood. What kind of access? Your employees, your systems, your suppliers, your pricing, your customer information. My stomach dropped. This wasn't about Daniel anymore. Michael was targeting me. And I finally understood something. The day Daniel walked into my office wasn't the day this began. It had started much earlier, perhaps even before Daniel ever knew he was in trouble. That night, I called Daniel. He answered immediately. Dad, where are you? At home. Come to my office tomorrow. There was silence. Why? I found something. What? I think Michael is using you to get to me. Daniel didn't speak. Dad, I need you to tell me everything. I don't know anything. Then find out. Another silence. Are you helping me? I looked out the window. I haven't decided. His voice became quiet. I don't deserve it. That isn't what I'm deciding. Then what are you deciding? I thought about the night he threw me out. Then about the little boy who once promised to protect me. Finally, I said, whether helping you will put everything I've built at risk. Daniel didn't answer. Neither did I. We ended the call. I turned off the lights, but I couldn't sleep. Because for the first time since leaving my son's house, I wasn't thinking about what Daniel had done to me. I was thinking about what Michael might do to both of us. And the next morning, we were going to find out just how far he had planned this. Because there was one document missing from Daniel's files. One document that could prove whether Michael had planned everything from the beginning. And Daniel was the only person who had ever seen it. Daniel arrived at my office at 8:06 the next morning. He looked like he hadn't slept, neither had I. He walked into my office and closed the door behind him. Yes, he sat down. What document? The one you didn't give my lawyer. His face changed. For a moment, he didn't say anything, then he whispered. I don't stare at him. You told me you saw it. I did. Then where is it? I don't know. Daniel, he looked away. I swear. I stood up. Start from the beginning. He took a deep breath. The document was shown to me about 8 months ago. By Michael? Yes. Where? In his office. What did it say? I don't remember everything. You'd better remember something. He rubbed his face. There was a list. A list of what? Companies. I waited. Several companies he'd invested in. And some of them were connected to each other. He nodded. Different names, different owners, but the same people kept appearing behind them. I frowned. Did you recognize any names? Yes. Whose? Daniel looked directly at me. Yours. My heart stopped. What? Your company. I felt the room become strangely quiet. You saw my company on that list? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't understand what it meant, Daniel. He lowered his head. I was ashamed. Of what? That I had already lost control of my company. I sat down. Tell me exactly what you remember. He closed his eyes. I remember Michael saying that your company was becoming valuable. How valuable? Very. What else? He said your company had something he wanted. What? Daniel shook his head. I don't know. You're sure? Yes. What was the name of the document? Daniel hesitated. Then he said, Project Evergreen. I wrote the words down. Project Evergreen? Why would a business plan have a name like that? I don't know. I looked at him. Where is the document now? Daniel stared at the floor. I destroyed it. I stood immediately. You what? I tore it up. Why? Because Michael told me to. I stared at my son. And you listened? Yes. Why? Daniel's voice broke. Because I was scared. I wanted to be angry. I was angry, but beneath that anger was something else, fear. Because if Daniel had destroyed the only evidence connecting Michael to my company, we might already be too late. My lawyer arrived 20 minutes later. I told him everything. He listened carefully. When I mentioned Project Evergreen, he immediately wrote it down. "Have you heard that name before?" I asked. "Yes." He pulled out his laptop. For the next 40 minutes, we searched company registrations, court filings, investment records, and public databases. Nothing, no Project Evergreen, no company, no trademark, no obvious connection. It was as if the name didn't exist. My lawyer leaned back. "That's not normal." "What do you mean? If Michael was using it internally, it might not appear in public records." "Then how do we find it?" "We need someone on the inside." Daniel looked at me. "I know someone." I turned toward him. "Who?" "His assistant." "Does she know about Evergreen?" "I think so." "Why?" "She once warned me about Michael." "What did she say?" Daniel hesitated. "She told me I shouldn't sign anything." "Did you listen?" "No." I looked at him. He gave a sad smile. "I thought I knew better." I nodded. "At least you're honest about it now." We tracked down the assistant that afternoon. Her name was Laura. She agreed to meet us at a coffee shop. She arrived wearing a dark coat and sunglasses. She looked around before sitting down. "You shouldn't have come," Daniel frowned. "Why?" "Because Michael knows you're looking into him." I felt my stomach tighten. "How?" "He has people watching his former clients." "Why?" "Because once they start asking questions, he gets nervous." My lawyer leaned forward. "Tell us about Project Evergreen." Laura went pale. "You know that name?" I saw the file. Laura looked at me. "Then you need to leave." "Why?" "Because Project Evergreen isn't about your son's company." I waited, she whispered. "It's about yours." The words hit me harder than I expected. "What is Evergreen?" Laura took a deep breath. "A takeover plan." My lawyer immediately began writing. "Takeover of what?" "Your company." I looked at Daniel. He closed his eyes. Laura continued. "Michael discovered your company almost 2 years ago. Through Daniel." She shook her head. "Before Daniel." That sentence changed everything. "What do you mean?" "He had been studying your company for months." "Why?" "Because you were growing quickly." "But why me?" Laura looked at me. "Because you owned something Michael couldn't easily buy." "What?" She hesitated. "Trust." "I didn't understand," she explained. "Your employees have been with you for years. Your customers trust you. Your suppliers trust you. Your reputation is strong." She leaned closer. "Michael can't simply buy that. So what does he do?" "He creates pressure." "What kind?" "Financial pressure." I felt a chill. Laura continued. "He finds a weak point, creates a relationship with the owner, offers money, encourages expansion. Then he uses debt to gain control." My lawyer asked. "And Daniel?" "He was supposed to become the bridge." Daniel looked up. "What?" Laura looked at him. "You were supposed to become part of your father's company." Daniel stared at her. "I never agreed to that." "You didn't know." She turned to me. "Michael wanted Daniel to merge with you." I felt sick. "Why?" "Because once his company was tied to yours, Michael could move money and debt between the two businesses." My lawyer looked at me. "That could have forced Robert's company into insolvency." I stared at Daniel. He looked devastated. "I didn't know." "I know," I said. "But you still signed." "I know." He lowered his head. Laura reached into her bag. "This is all I have." My lawyer looked at it. "What is it?" "Copies." "Of what?" "Emails, contracts, internal messages." She pushed it across the table. "I copied them before I left." My lawyer picked it up. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Laura laughed bitterly. She shook her head. "He has lawyers. Good lawyers. The best." She stood. "I have to go. Wait." She looked at me. "Why are you helping us?" Her eyes softened. "Because I watched him destroy people." She looked at Daniel. "And because I think you're first person actually survive him." Daniel looked confused. "Why me?" "Because your father changed you." Daniel frowned. "He did?" Laura nodded. "He doesn't know it yet." Then she walked away. We returned to my office. My lawyer inserted the USB drive into his computer. There were hundreds of files, mimes, spreadsheets, contracts, voice recordings. We opened the first file. Michael's name appeared. Then another. And another. For hours we worked through the documents. The pattern became obvious. Michael would approach business owners, before rapid growth, encourage them to borrow, then slowly take control. But one file was different. Its title was Evergreen. My lawyer opened it. I read the first page. My hands went cold. It contained a detailed plan for acquiring my company. Not someday. Not eventually. Now there were financial projections, at-wheat lists, names, supplier information, even my personal schedule. I stared at the screen. "How did he get all this?" My lawyer looked at me. Someone has been giving him information. I immediately thought of Daniel. Then I stopped. No, what? Daniel didn't have access to most of this. We kept reading. Then we found it, a name one of my employees. Someone who had been with me almost from the beginning. Someone I trusted. I stared at the name. I couldn't breathe. That's impossible. My lawyer looked at me. Do you know him? Yes. Who is he? I whispered his name. Mike. The same Mike who had encouraged me to take the largest contract in my company's history. The same Mike who had always been beside me. The same man I had trusted enough to let him manage our biggest accounts. Daniel looked at me. That I couldn't answer. My entire body felt numb. For years, I had believed that the people around me were part of what I had built. Now I was realizing something terrifying. Someone had been watching me from inside my own company. And suddenly, every major decision I had made began to look different. The expansion, the large contract, the new suppliers, the information leaks. Maybe some of my biggest opportunities hadn't been opportunities at all. Maybe they had been traps. My lawyer closed the laptop. We need to act carefully. How much time do we have? He looked at me. Not much. How much? He hesitated. Maybe 2 weeks. Until what? He looked at the final page of the document. Until Michael makes his move. I stared at the screen. 2 weeks, 14 days, and somewhere inside my company was a man I trusted who might be working against me. I looked at Daniel. For the first time in years, my son and I were facing the same enemy, but I still didn't know whether I could trust him, and he knew it. Dad, he said quietly. I looked at him. I know what you're thinking. What? That I might betray you again. I didn't answer. He nodded. You have every reason to think that. Then he stood. But I'm going to prove you wrong. He walked toward the door. I watched him leave. And for the first time since he had thrown me out of his house, I wondered if my son had finally started becoming the man I once believed he could be. But there was one thing neither of us knew. Mike had already discovered that Laura had given us the files, and that same night, he made a phone call that would force me to make the hardest decision of my life. At 11:43 that night, my phone rang. I was sitting alone in my apartment, staring at the ceiling. I had spent the entire evening going through the information Laura had given us. Every document made the same thing clearer. Michael had not discovered my company by accident. He had been studying it, watching it, waiting, and somehow he had gotten closer than I ever imagined. Then my phone rang again, unknown number. I almost ignored it. Something told me not to. Hello, nobody spoke. I waited. Then a man's voice said, Mr. Carter, you should be careful about who you trust. Who is this? You already know. The line went dead. I sat there staring at the phone. I knew immediately, Michael. But why call me? Why warn me? Unless he wanted me to know that he could reach me whenever he wanted. I didn't sleep that night. At 6:30 the next morning, I called my lawyer. Get to the office. What's happened? Someone just threatened me. There was a pause. Did they identify themselves? No, but you think it was Michael. I know it was. Then don't go to the office alone. I looked at the clock. I'll see you there. When I arrived, something felt wrong. The parking lot was nearly empty. Usually by 7:30, at least 10 employees were already inside. That morning there were only 3 cars. I unlocked the front door. The lights were off. I switched them on. Everything looked normal, too normal. My desk was untouched. The computers were still there. The files were in place. But then I noticed something. The security camera above the entrance was blinking red. I walked toward it. That's strange. The system had been working perfectly the night before. I called our IT technician. Check the security system. He came running 5 minutes later. He looked at me. Someone disabled it for 11 minutes. When? Last night. What time? He checked the log. 11:41. My heart sank. 2 minutes before Michael called me. Someone had entered my building. I called everyone into the conference room. 31 employees, all seated, all confused. I closed the door. Something serious has happened. Nobody spoke. I have reason to believe someone has been accessing confidential company information. A few employees looked at each other. Mike was sitting near the end of the table. He looked completely calm, too calm. I looked around the room. I need everyone to understand something. I paused. This isn't about blame. Mike raised an eyebrow. Then what is it? Finding the truth. He leaned back. About what? I looked directly at him. Who has been giving our information to Michael Grant? The room went silent. Mike's expression changed, but I saw it fear just for a second. Then he smiled. That's ridiculous. is it? Yes, I didn't answer. Instead, I told everyone that an independent investigator would be reviewing access records. Mike immediately stood. You don't trust us, I looked at him. I trust people. I paused. But I verify what they do. He sat back down. The meeting ended. Everyone left except Daniel. He waited until the room was empty. You saw something. What? When you looked at Mike, I looked at my son. You noticed? Yes. I nodded. Something's wrong. Daniel thought for a moment. Then don't confront him. Why? Because if he's guilty, he'll destroy evidence. I stared at him. He gave me a sad smile. Losing everything teaches you things. That sentence stayed with me. By noon, our investigator had started reviewing the company's systems. At 2:15, he called me. We found something. What? There were unauthorized downloads. From where? Mike's computer. My heart dropped. How much? Thousands of files. What kind? Customer contracts, supplier pricing, employee records, financial reports. I closed my eyes. How long? 6 months. Mike had been doing this while sitting in my office, eating lunch with us, shaking my hand, talking about expansion, pretending to be loyal. I felt sick. Can you prove he sent them to Michael? Not yet. What do we have? An encrypted email account. Can you open it? We're trying. I looked at the clock. Every minute mattered. At 5:30, Mike came into my office. He closed the door. You've been investigating me, he smiled. I thought so. You know why? He nodded. Because you think I betrayed you, did you? He stared at me. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. Yes. I froze, he continued. But not in the way you think. What does that mean? Mike sat down. Michael approached me 2 years ago. Why? Because he knew I worked for you. And you agreed to work with him. Yes. Why? Mike looked down. Money. I felt anger rising. You sold me for money? I made a mistake? He looked at me. You have no idea what he threatened me with. What? My son. I stared at him. What about your son? He has a drug problem. I said nothing. Michael knew about it. Mike's voice shook. He told me if I didn't cooperate, he'd make sure my son went to prison. I looked away. For the first time, I understood. Betrayal wasn't always simple. Sometimes people did terrible things because they were afraid. That didn't excuse Mike, but it explained him. What did you give him? What information? Everything. He asked, stared at him. Even the customer list? Yes. The supplier contracts? Yes, my personal schedule. He nodded. I felt betrayed all over again. Mike had looked at me, because I was too scared to stop. Then he pulled a small envelope from his pocket. He placed it on my desk. What is this? Proof. I opened it. Inside were printed emails. Michael had sent instructions. Mike had followed them. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. One email had been sent 6 months earlier. The subject line was, Fee 2. Carter's Sony looked at Mike. What is this? He swallowed. That was the day Michael decided to use Daniel. Use him for what? To get you angry. I stared at him. What? He knew your relationship with your son was weak, Mike continued. He knew Daniel was ambitious. He knew Daniel wanted to prove himself. He knew Daniel wanted to be successful. And he used all of that. I sat down slowly. Michael manipulated Daniel. Yes, but Daniel still signed everything. Yes, I closed my eyes. The truth was becoming harder to accept. Daniel had made terrible decisions. But perhaps someone had deliberately pushed every weakness he had toward the edge. And then I remembered something. The night Daniel threw me out. Michael had been there, not physically, but perhaps he had already been influencing him. I called Daniel. Dad, come to the office. Why? Mike confessed. There was silence. What did he confess? Michael used you. Daniel's breathing changed. What? Come here. 20 minutes later, Daniel walked into the office. Mike was still there. The moment Daniel saw him, his face hardened. You. Mike looked down. I'm sorry. Daniel stepped forward. You ruined my life. Mike didn't defend himself. I know. You made me lose my family. Mike closed his eyes. I know. Daniel looked ready to explode. I stepped between them. Enough. Daniel turned toward me. He did this. I know. Then why are you protecting him? I'm not. I looked at both men. I'm trying to understand everything before I decide what happens next. Daniel's fists tightened. Then he asked, what did Michael want? Mike looked at me. He wanted your father to make one mistake. I frowned. What mistake? He wanted you to overexpand. I froze. Mike continued. He wanted your company carrying too much debt. Why? Because once you were financially vulnerable, Michael could force a sale. My mind went back to the large contract. The one I almost accepted without hesitation. The one that could have expanded my company overnight. The one Michael had secretly arranged. I felt sick. That contract, Mike nodded, was his biggest trap. I sat down. If I had accepted it without investigating, I could have lost everything. Not because my business was weak, because someone had engineered a situation where my own ambition could destroy me. That evening, my lawyer arrived with another update. He had traced the investment structure. "Robert, we have a problem." "What now?" "Michael doesn't need to take your company directly." "What does that mean?" "He has another way." "How?" "Debt." I stared at him. "He can buy your debts. Some of them." "Why would he?" "To become your creditor." I understood immediately. If Michael controlled enough of the company's obligations, he could eventually force a sale. My lawyer nodded. "And he's already started." "How much?" "About 40% of your short-term financing." "How?" "Through shell companies." I looked at Daniel. He looked devastated. "Dad," I held up my hand. "Not now." I needed to think. For the first time since building my company, I was facing a threat I couldn't solve with hard work. I needed strategy, I needed evidence, and I needed people I could trust. But there was another problem. We had only days, and Michael knew we had discovered him. That night, Daniel stayed behind. He sat across from me. "I owe you an apology." I looked at him. "For what?" "For everything. You already apologized." "No." He shook his head. "That wasn't enough." I remained silent. "I thought I was better than you." His voice cracked. "I thought you were old." He looked at the floor. "I thought you had nothing left to teach me." I didn't say anything. "Then I lost everything." He wiped his eyes. "And you were still standing." I looked at him. "Daniel, I know you don't trust me." I didn't deny it. "But I'm going to help you stop Michael." I studied his face. "Why?" He looked at me. "Because I finally understand something." "What?" "You didn't fail as my father." He swallowed. "I failed as your son." Those words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I saw the 6-year-old boy again. The bicycle, the scraped knee, the promise. "When I grow up, I'm going to take care of you." Maybe that boy wasn't completely gone. Maybe he had just been buried beneath years of pride. I reached across the desk. Daniel looked at my hand, then took it. It was the first time we had held hands in years, but neither of us knew how much danger was coming. Because the next morning, Michael filed a lawsuit against my company. And he wasn't asking for money. He was asking the court to freeze my business, every account, every asset, every dollar. And if the judge granted it, I would lose everything I had spent years building, including the company that had finally taught me I was never a burden. The lawsuit arrived at 8:12 on a Monday morning. I was standing beside the conference table when my lawyer walked into the office carrying a thick envelope. He didn't sit. That was the first thing I noticed. "What happened?" He placed the envelope on the table. "Michael filed against us." I looked at the paper. "On what grounds?" "Breach of contract, fraud, misrepresentation." I frowned. "Fraud?" "Yes, against me?" He nodded. I opened the first page. My name was there, my company's name, and beneath it were claims that could destroy everything I had built. I read silently, then I looked up. "This is a lie." "I know." "Then why are you worried?" "Because Michael isn't trying to win the lawsuit." I stared at him. "What is he trying to do?" "He's trying to freeze your assets while the case is being decided." My stomach dropped. "For how long?" "If the judge grants the request, potentially months." "Months?" "Yes." I looked around the office. 31 employees, dozens of customers, vehicles, equipment contracts, payroll. Everything depended on cash flow. If the accounts were frozen, the company couldn't operate. My lawyer continued. "And there's something else." "What?" "He's asking for an emergency hearing." "When?" "Tomorrow." I sat tomorrow. We had less than 24 hours. I called Daniel. He arrived within 30 minutes. When he saw the documents, his face went pale. "He's doing it." "What?" "It's the final phase." I looked at him. "What does that mean?" Daniel pointed at the lawsuit. "Michael told me once that if you ever resisted him, he'd use the courts." "Did he say why?" "He said rich people don't win because they're smarter." I waited. "They win because they can survive longer." I looked at my lawyer. He nodded. "That is exactly what he's trying to do." Michael didn't need to prove I was guilty. He just needed to keep the case alive long enough to destroy my company. I looked at Daniel. Daniel hesitated. "I know someone." "Who?" "My old accountant." "Why?" "He handled Michael's first investment." "Can he testify?" "Maybe." "Then find him." Daniel nodded. He picked up his phone, then stopped. "Dad, yes, if this goes badly." I looked at him. Don't, but we're not losing. He nodded. For the first time in years, I saw determination in his eyes. Not arrogance, not pride. Determination. That afternoon, Daniel found his former accountant. His name was Thomas Reed. He agreed to meet us at a law office across town. Thomas was nervous. He kept looking toward the windows. You understand what you're asking me to do? My lawyer nodded. We're asking you to tell the truth. Thomas laughed bitterly. Truth can be expensive. I looked at him. So can silence. He stared at me, then opened his briefcase. I have something. He pulled out a folder. This was from Michael's first company. My lawyer took it. What is it? Internal financial projections. He opened the folder. There were charts, numbers, dates. I leaned forward. Then I saw it. A timeline, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. And at the end, acquisition of Carter Industrial. I felt my throat tighten. The plan had been created almost 2 years earlier, before Daniel's company collapsed, before Michael approached me, before I even knew his name. My lawyer looked at Thomas. Where did you get this? I prepared it. You prepared this? Yes. Under whose instructions? Thomas swallowed. Michael's. I looked at Daniel. He stared at the document. This was planned from the beginning. Thomas nodded. He wanted your father's company, Daniel whispered. Why? Thomas looked at me. Because your father's company was worth more than you realize. I frowned. Why? Not because of its equipment, he pointed to the projections, because of its contracts. I didn't understand, Thomas explained. Your company had long-term agreements with manufacturers across the region. Yes, those contracts were difficult to replace. Yes, Michael wanted access to them. My lawyer looked up. So the company wasn't the target. The relationships were. I leaned back. Suddenly, everything made sense. Michael didn't want my building. He didn't want my vehicles. He didn't even care about my equipment. He wanted my reputation, my contracts, my customers, my network, everything I had spent years earning. Thomas looked at Daniel. Your father built something rare. Daniel nodded. I know. No, Thomas said. You don't. Daniel looked at him. Your father built trust. Daniel lowered his eyes. Thomas continued. That's what Michael couldn't create himself. I looked at my son. I didn't know what to say. For years I had thought my company was built on machines and maintenance contracts. But maybe the real business had always been something else. People trusted us. They trusted me. And Michael wanted to buy what couldn't simply be purchased. The next morning, we entered the courthouse. I hadn't been inside one in decades. Daniel walked beside me. Neither of us spoke. The hearing lasted almost 2 hours. Michael's lawyer presented evidence, financial records, compressed prompts. They made everything look convincing. For a moment, even I wondered whether we could survive. Then our lawyer stood. He presented the evidence from Thomas, the original acquisition plan, dated nearly 2 years earlier, before Michael had any legitimate business relationship with my company. The courtroom became quiet. Michael's lawyer objected. Our lawyer continued. Then came the emails. Michael discussing my company, my employees, my contracts, my expansion. The large contract I had almost accepted. Then came the most damaging document, Project Evergreen. The judge read it, then looked at Michael's lawyer. Can you explain this? He couldn't. Michael sat behind him. For the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. The judge denied the emergency asset freeze. My lawyer exhaled. I closed my eyes. The company was safe for now. As we walked outside, reporters were waiting. Questions came from every direction. Mr. Carter, did Michael Grant attempt to take over your company? Were you targeted because of your son's business? Did you know your employee was secretly working with Michael? I didn't answer. Daniel stood beside me. Then a reporter asked, Mr. Carter, is it true that your own son was involved in the original deal? Daniel froze. I looked at him. He looked terrified. The truth was about to become public. I stepped toward the microphones. Yes, the reporters made mistakes. Daniel looked at me. Serious mistakes, I continued. But he has taken responsibility for them. Someone asked, do you forgive him? I looked at Daniel. He was standing there with tears in his eyes. I said, forgiveness isn't something you announce. I paused. It's something you decide in private. Then I walked away. That evening, Daniel came to my apartment. He sat on the couch. I heard what you said. Yes. Why did you defend me? I looked at him. Because you're my son. He looked down. After everything? Yes, even after I threw you out? I took a deep breath. Yes. He began crying. Not quietly. Not the way adults usually cry when they're trying to hide it. He cried like the little boy who had once scraped his knee. I sat beside him. He whispered, "I am so sorry." I put my hand on his shoulder. "I know. I treated you like you were nothing. I know. I was ashamed of you. I know. I thought money made me better. I know." He looked at me. "How can you still love me?" I didn't answer immediately. Then I said, "Because I'm your father." Covered his face. I let him cry. I didn't tell him everything was okay, because it wasn't. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. And love doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. But for the first time, I believed our relationship might have a future. The next morning, my lawyer called. "Robert, you won." Smiled. "Good, but there's a problem." I stopped. "What now?" "Michael is leaving the country." I frowned. "Why?" "He's transferring his assets." "To where?" "Several offshore companies." My smile disappeared. "Can he do that?" "Some of it." "What does he plan to do?" "We don't know," then my lawyer said. "There is one thing you should see." "What?" "A document Michael filed yesterday. He emailed it to me. I opened it. It was a resignation letter. Michael was stepping away from his investment company. I frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "No. Why would he resign now?" My lawyer was silent. Then he said, "Because someone else has taken control." My stomach tightened. "Who?" "I don't know." I looked at the document again. At the bottom was a signature, a name I had never seen before. Then I noticed the company listed beneath it. My heart stopped, because it was a company I knew, a company that had been one of my largest clients for years. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. Michael might not have been the person behind everything. He might have been working for someone else, someone who had been watching my company from the beginning, someone whose name was about to change the entire story. And the next morning, that person called me directly. The phone rang at 7:14 in the morning. I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when I saw the number private. I almost ignored it. After everything that had happened, I had learned one thing. Sometimes the phone ringing is the beginning of a problem. Sometimes it's the beginning of an answer. I picked it up. "Hello." A man's voice came through. "Mr. Carter." "Yes?" "My name is Richard Hale." I didn't recognize the name. "Why are you calling me?" "Because I believe we have something in common." I frowned. "What?" "Michael Grant." My hand tightened around the phone. "What about him?" "He worked for me." I went completely still. "Worked for you?" "Yes." I looked toward the window. The morning suddenly felt colder. "You?" "I'm the chairman of Hale Industrial Group." That name I knew. Everyone in the regional manufacturing industry knew it. Hale Industrial wasn't just a successful company. It was an empire: factories, warehouses, logistics, technology, investment funds. They had contracts with some of the largest manufacturers in the country. And somehow, this man had been connected to Michael. "How long?" "Almost 3 years." I sat down. "Then why did Michael pretend to work independently?" Richard laughed softly. "Because that's what he was supposed to do." I felt a chill. "Why?" "To find companies worth acquiring." I closed my eyes. "So my company was one of them." There was a pause. "Because your company had something my group wanted." "What?" "Access." "Access to what?" "Your customers." I already knew that answer. But hearing it from the man behind the operation made it different. I asked, "Why didn't you simply make me an offer?" "Because you would have refused." I laughed bitterly. "You don't know me." "Oh, I do." That sentence made my stomach tighten. "You've been studied." "Studied your business, your habits, your decision-making, your relationships with employees." I stood. "This is insane." Richard remained calm. "You think Michael was the first person I sent?" I didn't answer. "You were approached by 3 investment groups before him." I remembered them. Offers, partnerships, expansion proposals. At the time, I had considered them ordinary business opportunities. Now I understood. They weren't random. They were tests. Richard continued. "You refused every, so you decided to destroy me." "No, then what? We wanted to buy you. You tried and failed." "Then why are you calling me now?" His voice became quieter. "Because Michael failed too." I waited. "And now I want to offer you something." "What?" "A partnership." I laughed. "After everything, yes. You tried to take my company. I tried to acquire it. You manipulated my son. I never told your son to throw you out." "No." I paused. "But you knew what he was becoming." "Yes." That answer hurt, not because I was surprised, because it was so cold. "You knew my son was ambitious." "Yes." "You knew he was desperate for success." "Yes." "You knew he was vulnerable." "Yes." "And you used that." "We used his ambition." I looked at the phone. There was no emotion in Richard's voice, To him, Daniel wasn't my son. He was a business opportunity. That was when I understood the difference between people like him and people like me. He measured everything in numbers. I measured things in people. "What exactly do you want?" Richard answered immediately. 40% of your company." I laughed. "No, you haven't heard the offer. I don't need to. You would receive enough capital to expand nationally. No, you'd have access to our logistics network. No, you'd keep control. No." He became silent. Then he asked, "Why?" "Because I don't sell pieces of my life." "You already did once. The word sold your house." I froze. "You sold it for your son." "How do you know that?" "I know almost everything about you." I felt something inside me snap. "You don't know anything about me." "I know your wife died." I said nothing. "I know you moved in with your son." Silence. "I know he threw you out." My hands were shaking, and I know what happened after. I hung up. I stood there for several minutes. Then my phone rang again. I didn't answer. It rang a third time. I finally picked it up. "What?" Richard said. "You're angry." "Yes, good. What do you mean anger makes people honest?" I laughed. "You've been watching me, yes. Then you should know my answer." "I do." "No." He paused. "You haven't given it yet." I hung up again. This time he didn't call back. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later. He saw my face. "What happened?" I told him everything. His expression changed when I mentioned Hale Industrial. "I know that company. So do I." "No." He shook his head. "You don't understand." "What?" "I met Richard once, about a year before Michael approached me." I stared at him. "What?" Daniel nodded. "He came to one of my business events. Why?" "I thought he was interested in investing." "Did he talk to you?" "Yes." "What did he say?" "He asked about you." I felt a chill. "What did he ask?" "What exactly? How much revenue you had, your biggest clients, your suppliers, your plans for expansion." I stared at my son. "And what did you tell him?" Looked ashamed. "Everything." I closed my eyes. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. Then I asked, "Did you know what he was planning?" "No." "Did you suspect anything?" "No." I believed him. For the first time I realized something. Daniel hadn't betrayed me because he wanted me to fail. He had betrayed me because he wanted to become successful so badly that he stopped asking questions. That was his greatest mistake. Not greed, pride. I sat down. Daniel remained standing. "Dad." "Yes? I need to tell you something else." "What?" "I found the original Project Evergreen document." My heart stopped. "What?" "The copy Michael gave me." "You said you destroyed it." I lied. "Why?" "Because I was afraid." "Where is it?" Daniel reached into his jacket. He pulled out a folded envelope. I kept it. I took it. My hands were shaking. "Why didn't you give me this before?" "Because I thought if Michael knew I still had it, he'd come after me." I opened the envelope. Inside was a single document, the original Project Evergreen plan. I read the first page, then the second, then the third. But something was different. There was a name at the bottom. Not Michael, not Richard. Someone else, a person I knew, someone I had trusted. I stared at the signature. "Yes. Do you know who this is?" He leaned forward. Then his face went white. "No. You've seen the name before." He shook his head. "No." I pointed. "Look." He stared at it, then whispered, "That's impossible." "Why?" "Because that man died 10 years ago." I looked at the signature again. My lawyer entered the office. He saw our faces. "What happened?" I handed him the document. He read it. Then he looked at me. "Robert, what?" "This changes everything." "How?" He pointed to the signature. "This is the name of the original owner of your company." I froze. My father. The man who had founded the small repair shop that eventually became my company. My father had died 10 years earlier, yet his name appeared on a document that was supposedly created 2 years ago. I looked at Daniel. He looked terrified. "How is that possible?" Nobody answered. My lawyer turned the page. There was another name beneath it, a beneficiary, a company. And suddenly we realized something. The business I thought I had built from nothing might have been connected to a family trust I never knew existed, a trust that had been created long before I was born. And whoever controlled that trust might actually control the future of my company. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my father. He had always been a private man. He rarely talked about money, rarely talked about business. When I was young, I assumed he simply didn't have much. But perhaps I had misunderstood him. Maybe he had been protecting something. Maybe the company I believed I had built alone had a history I never knew. The next morning, I searched through my father's old belongings, boxes, letters, photographs, receipts. I found nothing. Then I remembered something, a sentence he had told me when I was 16. At the time I thought it was meaningless. Now it suddenly felt important, he had said. Robert, if you ever build something of your own, don't let anyone convince you that it's worthless. I had always assumed he was talking about hard work. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was talking about something else. I called my aunt. She was the only living relative who had known my father well. Aunt Helen, yes. Did Dad ever create a trust? She went silent. I heard her breathing change. Please, another silence. Then she whispered, You found out. My heart began pounding. Found out what? I promised your father I wouldn't tell you unless you were in danger. What did he do? She took a deep breath. Your father wasn't the man you thought he was. I sat down. What does that mean? He had partners, business partners, yes. Who? I don't know all of them. But there was one. Who? She hesitated, then she said a name. The same name that appeared in the Project Evergreen document. I felt my blood run cold. That's impossible. I know he died. No, I froze. What? He disappeared. My hands went cold. What do you mean? Your father believed he had been killed. I couldn't breathe. Then why is his name on that document? I don't know. I ended the call. For several minutes I just sat there. My entire understanding of my family history had been turned upside down. And then my phone rang. It was my lawyer. Robert. Yes, we found something. What? The signature on Project Evergreen isn't a forgery. I stood. What? We checked the records. Then how? He paused. Because the person who signed it is still legally alive. My heart stopped. Who? He gave me the name. The same man my aunt had just said disappeared. The same man my father believed was dead. And then my lawyer said something that made my entire body go cold. He owns 49% of your company. I couldn't speak, because suddenly the story wasn't about Michael. It wasn't even about Daniel. It was about my own family. And the man behind everything had been connected to my company long before my son was even born. For several seconds I couldn't speak. My lawyer's words kept repeating in my head. He owns 49% of your company. How? I don't know yet. You just told me he's legally alive. Yes. Then find him. We're trying. No. I shook my head. I don't want someone trying. I looked directly at him. My lawyer hesitated. Robert, we need to be careful. I've spent my whole life being careful. I picked up the document, and apparently that wasn't enough. His name was Edward Bennett. My father had mentioned him exactly once. I was 17. My father and Edward had apparently worked together before I was born. At least that's what my father had told me. He said Edward had betrayed him. Then he never mentioned the man again. I had forgotten about it. Until now, I searched through every box in my father's old storage room. After 3 hours, I found a photograph, 2 young men standing outside a small workshop, my father and Edward. They were smiling. Standing beside them was a third man. I didn't recognize him. I turned the photograph over. There was a handwritten note. Robert, if you're ever holding this, something went wrong. My hands began shaking. I read the next line. Trust the person who asks questions, not the person who gives answers. I stared at the words. My father had known. Somehow, he had known that one day I might find this. But there was more. At the bottom was a date, September 18, 1981. That was the year before I started working at the original shop. I turned the photograph over again. A phone number was written beneath the note. 7 digits. I had no idea whether it still worked. I called anyway. The number rang once, twice, 3 times. Then someone answered. Hello. I froze. The voice was old, but calm. Edward. Silence. Then, who is this? My name is Robert Carter. The line went completely silent. Then the man said, I've been waiting for you. My heart stopped. I didn't tell Daniel about the call immediately. I wasn't sure why. Perhaps because some part of me still needed to understand what I was dealing with. I met Edward the following afternoon. He chose an old restaurant outside the city. When I walked in, I saw him sitting alone in the corner. He was in his late 70s, gray hair, thin face, a walking cane beside him. He looked nothing like the dangerous businessman I had imagined. He looked tired. I approached the table. Edward. He looked up. Yes. I sat down. For several seconds. Neither of us spoke. Then he said, You look like your father. I felt anger rising. You knew him? Yes. He believed you were dead. Edward looked down. I know. Why did you disappear? He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, Because your father asked me to. I stared at him. What? He told me to disappear. Why? Because someone was trying to take the company. I frowned. Who? Edward looked directly into my eyes. Your father never knew. I didn't understand. What do you mean he thought I was the threat? But you weren't? No. Then why didn't you explain? Because by the time I could, it was too late. I leaned forward. Edward, I need the truth. He nodded. You deserve it. He told me a story I had never heard before. When my father started the original repair business, he didn't do it alone. Edward had provided the initial capital. My father provided the technical knowledge. They built the business together. But after several years, my father became convinced Edward was stealing from the company. The numbers didn't match. Money was disappearing. Contracts were being redirected. My father confronted him. Edward denied everything. Then one morning, Edward disappeared. My father assumed he had fled. Years later, my father told everyone Edward was dead. But according to Edward, that wasn't what happened. I didn't steal from your father, he said. Then who did? I didn't know. Until when? Until much later. He pulled a folder from his briefcase. Your father had been investigating the wrong person. I opened the folder. Inside were bank records, old contracts, company documents, and one name appeared again and again. A lawyer. Someone who had represented my father's company. I looked at Edward. Who was he? Edward gave me the name. I knew it. My heart dropped. It was the father of Michael Grant. I stared at the page. Michael's father? Edward nodded. He was the one moving the money. I couldn't believe it. But why? Because he wanted control. Of my father's company, yes. Then what happened? Your father discovered the scheme. And you? I helped him. Then why did my father think you betrayed him? Because Michael's father made sure the evidence pointed toward me. I sat back. A family betrayal. A business conspiracy. And decades later, the same family name had returned. But I still had one question. Why do you own 49% of my company? Edward looked at me. Because your father never sold my share. What? He kept it. Why? Because he wanted to protect you. I frowned. Protect me from what? Edward's voice became quiet. From the people who would eventually come after the company. I stared at him. Then why did you wait all these years? Because your father made me promise. What promise? That I would never interfere unless the company was in danger. I looked at the documents, and now it is. I returned to my office that evening. Daniel was waiting. He stood when I entered. Where were you? I met Edward. Daniel's face changed. He's alive? Yes. What did he say? I put the documents on the desk. Your father's family has been connected to my company for decades. Daniel sat down. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he looked at me. Dad, yes. Then Michael wasn't acting alone, no. And Richard Hale, possibly. Daniel shook his head. This is insane. I almost laughed. Yes. Then he looked at me. What happens now? I didn't know. For years, I had thought the hardest thing I would ever face was being rejected by my own son. Now I was discovering that my company, and perhaps my family's entire history, had been caught in a battle that started before Daniel was even born. But there was one thing I knew. I wasn't going to run. The following morning, Edward came to my office. He walked slowly through the building. Employees stared. He looked around at the walls, the company logo, the photographs, the awards. Then he stopped in front of an old framed picture. It was a photograph of my father. Edward touched the frame. He would have been proud. I said nothing. Then Edward handed me an envelope. Your father left this for you. I stared at it. You've had this all these years? Yes. Why give it to me now? Because you're ready. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. The first sentence made my eyes burn. My son, if you are reading this, I failed to protect you from a mistake I made many years ago. I kept reading. My father explained that he had discovered the financial scheme. He knew someone was trying to gain control of the company. But he had never discovered exactly who was behind it. So he created a trust designed to protect the company from hostile acquisition. Edward held 49%. My father held 51%. When my father died, his 51% transferred to me. But there was a condition. If I ever sold the majority stake without Edward's approval, the trust would trigger. The company would become vulnerable. I looked up. So I don't actually own the company outright. Edward shook his head. No. Neither do you. No. Then who does? Edward pointed toward the letter. The trust. I stared at him. What happens if someone tries to take control? Edward's expression became serious. The trust can block the transfer. I felt relief for the first time in days. I thought perhaps we had finally found a way to stop Michael and Richard. Then Edward said, There's one problem. What? The trust expires. When? 30 days from now, my heart sank. What happens then? If the company isn't reorganized before the expiration date? He paused. Anyone holding a valid claim can attempt to acquire the shares. I stared at him. Michael or Richard? How do they know? Edward looked at me. They've known for years. I felt the blood drain from my face. Then why haven't they acted? Because they needed you to make a mistake. I remembered the expansion contract, the loans, the pressure, the lawsuit, everything. They hadn't needed to steal my company. They had been waiting for me to destroy my own position, and I almost had, that afternoon. Daniel and I sat together in my office. For the first time, we weren't father and son arguing about the past. We were partners trying to survive the present. Daniel looked at the documents. We have 30 days. Yes, and Michael knows. Yes, and Richard knows. He leaned back. What are we going to do? I looked at him. I don't know. He smiled faintly. That's the first time I've ever heard you say that. I laughed. I'm getting old. Daniel shook his head. No. He looked at me. You're just finally letting someone help you. That sentence stayed with me because he was right. For most of my life, I had believed being strong meant carrying everything alone. Maybe that had been my mistake too. The next morning, Daniel made an unexpected proposal. Let me take responsibility for the restructuring. I looked at him. No. Why? Because this is my company. I know, and you're not ready. He nodded. I wasn't. The words surprised me. But I am now. I studied him. What makes you think that? He looked at the floor. Because I know what happens when you think you can do everything yourself. I smiled. Fair point, he continued. I don't want your company. I know. I want to earn back your trust. That sentence hit me harder than anything else. For years, I had wanted my son to understand what he had done. Now he finally did. But trust isn't rebuilt with one apology. It's rebuilt with hundreds of small decisions. So I gave him one chance, one project. What? You handle the legal and financial restructuring. He looked surprised. But if you make one mistake? I know. He smiled. I won't. I nodded. Then prove it. For the next 2 weeks, Daniel worked beside my lawyer. He reviewed contracts, met with bankers, negotiated with suppliers, fixed mistakes he had once been too proud to admit. And slowly I began noticing something. He was changing. He listened more, he asked questions, he admitted when he didn't know something. He stopped trying to impress people. One evening he came into my looked up. A way to do what? Protect the company after the trust expires. How? We can restructure ownership. I stood. Explain. He smiled. If Edward transfers his 49% into a protected holding structure and you transfer your majority into the same structure, neither Michael nor Richard can force a sale. I stared at him. That could work. It will. I smiled. For the first time in years, I felt something close to hope. Then Daniel's phone rang. He answered. His expression changed. What happened? He listened, then looked at me. Dad. What? The bank just froze our operating account. My smile disappeared. What? They say there's a new claim. From who? Daniel slowly lowered the phone. Richard Hale. I felt my chest tighten. That's impossible. Daniel shook his head. No. He looked at the screen. It's not a claim against the company. Then what? He looked at me. It's against you. And when I saw the amount Richard was demanding, I realized the final battle had just begun. The number on the screen didn't look real. I read it once, then again. Then a third time, $8.7 million. Richard Hale was claiming that I personally owed his investment group $8.7. I looked at Daniel. How? He shook his head. I don't know. My lawyer took the phone. Let me see. He read the notice. His face became serious. This is based on a guarantee. He looked at me. A personal guarantee. I felt confused. I never signed anything. That's the problem. He turned the screen toward me. There was a signature. My signature. I stared at it. It looked exactly like mine, but I knew I had never signed that document. This is forged. My lawyer nodded. I believe you. But the bank doesn't know. So what do? We challenge it. How long? He hesitated. Not long enough. I looked at Daniel. What does that mean? The bank can freeze the accounts while the claim is investigated. I felt my stomach drop. How long? Possibly weeks. We can't survive weeks. I know. Our company had payroll, vehicles, suppliers, insurance, customer obligations. Everything required cash. A frozen account could destroy us within days. I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, employees were still working. They had no idea. They had families, mortgages, children. Their lives depended on the company. I couldn't let them down. Daniel looked at me. Dad, yes, I can fix this. I turned around. How? He hesitated. I'll sell what I have. I almost laughed. You have nothing. I still have one thing. What? My remaining shares in my old company. I stared at him. You still own a small percentage. Much. Enough to raise some money. No. Dad, no. Why? Because you need that money. He shook his head. You need it more. I looked at my son. That isn't your responsibility. He smiled sadly. Maybe it should be. The next morning, Daniel went to his former company. He met with the remaining shareholders. I didn't know what happened. He didn't tell me. All I knew was that by the afternoon he had sold everything. His remaining shares, his car, some investments, even the watch Melissa had given him. He brought me a check. I stared at it. You did this, yes. How much? Enough to cover payroll for 2 months. I pushed it back. No. He pushed it toward me. Take it, I can't. You, Daniel. He looked at me. You gave me everything when I was a kid. I never expected repayment, I know. Then why? He swallowed. Because I finally understand. Understand what? What you gave up for me. I looked at him. He continued. You sold your house. You gave up your retirement plans. You moved into my house, and I treated you like a burden. His voice broke. I can't change what I did, but I can change what I do now. I looked at the check, then at him. Finally, I took it. Thank you. He nodded. That was the first time in years that my son had done something for me without expecting anything in return. The next 7 days were chaos. Our lawyers challenged the forged guarantee. The bank refused to release the accounts. Employees began asking questions. Customers started calling. Rumors spread. Someone told a supplier we were going bankrupt. Another claimed I was being investigated for fraud. The internet was filled with stories. I refused to respond, but inside, I was terrified. One afternoon, I walked through the office. Mike was working at his desk. He looked up. Everything okay? I smiled. Yes. He didn't believe me, neither did I. On Friday afternoon, our largest customer called. The company represented almost 20% of our annual revenue. The manager said, Robert, I need to know if your company is stable. I looked at the financial reports on my desk. We're dealing with a temporary legal issue. That's not what I asked. I paused. Yes, we've heard the accounts are frozen. They are. Then we may need to suspend our contract. My heart sank. If you do that, it could put us under. I understand. Please give us 2 weeks. There was silence. 2 weeks. Yes, I'll give you 1. He hung up. I sat back. 1 week. 7 days. That was all I had. That evening, Daniel came into my office. He looked exhausted. We have a problem. I know. No. He placed a document on my desk. This is different. I read it. My face changed. Richard's settlement offer. I read the first paragraph, then the second, then the third. He'll release the bank accounts. Yes. In exchange for, Daniel looked at me. 49% of the company. I laughed. He wants the exact percentage Edward owns. Yes, I looked at Daniel. That's not a coincidence. No, I stood. If we accept, we lose control. Daniel nodded. And if we don't, we could lose everything. I sat down for the first time in years. I felt trapped. There was no perfect choice. Only bad choices. And I hated that. That night, I went to see Edward. He was sitting on his porch. I told him everything. He listened. Then he said, Your father faced the same decision. What? 30 years ago. I looked at him. Someone offered him money for his majority share. Did he accept? No. Why? Because he knew once you sell control, you don't own anything anymore. I nodded. But what if refusing means losing everything? Edward looked at me. Then you rebuild. I laughed. I'm 64. He smiled. I stared at him. He continued. You think your company is the building? He pointed toward the city. It isn't. Then what is it? I didn't answer. You built the company once, Edward said. You can build it again. His words stayed with me, but there was still one problem. 31 employees, their families, their livelihoods. I couldn't simply gamble with their lives because of my pride. Maybe that was the difference between the old me and the man I had become. When I was younger, I might have risked everything to prove someone wrong. Now I had people depending on me. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting. Everyone came into the conference room. I looked at their faces. I knew some were afraid. Some had probably already updated their resumes. I couldn't blame them. I stood. I want to tell you the truth. Nobody moved. Our accounts are frozen. A murmur went through the room. Legal challenge. Someone asked, Are we closing? No. Another voice, Are we going bankrupt? I don't know. The room became silent, I continued. But I can promise you one thing. I looked at every person. I will not lie to you. I explained the situation, the forged guarantee, the settlement offer, the threat to our ownership. When I finished, I expected panic. Instead, Mike stood. I've worked here for 6 years. Everyone looked at him. I betrayed this company once. His voice shook. I won't do it again. He looked around. If Robert loses this company, I lose too. Another employee stood, then another. Within minutes, everyone was talking. They didn't want to leave. They wanted to fight. I stood there listening, and something inside me changed. Years ago, I had walked out of my son's house thinking I had nothing. Now I stood in a room filled with people who believed in something I had built. I wasn't alone anymore. Our lawyer called Robert. Yes, we found the original guarantee. My heart jumped. What? The bank has a copy, but I never signed it. You're right. Then there's a problem. What? The lawyer paused. The signature isn't forged. I froze. What? It was digitally authorized. By whom? Silence. Robert, tell me. We traced the authorization. My stomach tightened. To whom? He said the name. And I felt the world stop. Because the authorization had come from inside my company, using a computer belonging to someone I trusted, someone who had been working beside me every day, someone I had never once suspected. I looked toward the office window. Daniel was standing outside. He saw my face. He walked in. I couldn't speak. My lawyer continued on the phone. We need to talk about this immediately. Daniel stared at me. Dad, I finally whispered, the guarantee was authorized from inside the company. His face changed. Who? I looked at him. But then I remembered something. The night the security system went down, the 11 minutes, the missing files, the strange emails, and one person had access to everything. The person who had been helping us investigate, my lawyer. I slowly call everyone. Daniel frowned. Why? Because I think we've been looking at the wrong traitor. He stared at me. Who? I looked at the closed office door, and for the first time, I wondered if the person who had been helping me save my company was actually the person trying to destroy it. I didn't accuse my lawyer. Not yet. That was the first lesson my father had ever taught me about business. When you suspect someone, don't confront them until you know what they think you don't know. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I stayed quiet. I looked at Daniel. Call everyone. Everyone. Everyone who has had access to the financial system. Daniel nodded. He picked up his phone. Within 20 minutes, the conference room was full. My lawyer sat at the head of the table. Mike was there, our accountant, our financial director, our IT manager, and Daniel. I stood at the front. I have a question. Nobody spoke. Who authorized the digital guarantee? We're still investigating. I looked. No. He stopped. I already know how it was authorized. His face remained calm. Then what are you asking? I'm asking who did it. He leaned back. If you know, why ask us? Because I want to see who lies. The room went silent. I watched everyone's faces. Mike looked nervous. The accountant looked confused. The IT manager stared at the table. My lawyer remained completely still. Too still. Then he smiled. I haven't accused anyone. You implied it. No. I shook my head. I gave everyone a chance to explain. Nobody spoke. Then Daniel said, Dad. Yes. Show them the evidence. I looked at him. He nodded. I placed a folder on the table. Inside were access logs, timestamps, computer records, .curity entries. The room became tense. The guarantee was authorized at 11:46 p.m. I looked around. Who was working at that time? The IT manager checked his notes. No one. Then someone was working remotely. He nodded. We found one remote connection. From where? He looked at me. Your lawyer's office. Everyone turned toward him. My lawyer didn't move. He simply said, that doesn't prove anything. No, I replied, it doesn't. I opened another folder. But this might. I placed a printed email on the table. The email had been sent from an encrypted account. The recipient was Michael Grant, and the sender was my lawyer. The room erupted. Mike stood. What the hell? My lawyer looked at the paper, then looked at me. You've made a mistake. Have I? Yes. He picked up the document. This email is fabricated. I smiled. That's what I thought you'd say. I turned toward the IT manager. Show them. He connected his laptop to the screen. The original server logs appeared. The email wasn't fabricated. It had been sent. From my lawyer's private 6 p.m., the exact moment the guarantee was authorized. Daniel looked at me. His face was pale. You trusted him? Yes. For how long? 11 years. My lawyer slowly stood. Robert, you're making a terrible mistake. I looked at him. No, I shook my head. The mistake was trusting you. He didn't run, that surprised me. Instead, he smiled, a cold, almost disappointed smile. You really think you figured everything out? I stared at him. You betrayed me. No, he shook his head. By helping Michael. You don't understand. Then explain. He looked around the room. Michael wasn't the real threat. I felt a chill. Then who was? He looked at me. Richard Hale. I already knew that name. But you worked for Michael. Yes. Why? Because everyone did. I frowned. What does that mean? He laughed. You think this is one man trying to steal your company? He shook his head. It's an industry. He walked toward the window. Companies like yours don't disappear because one rich man wants them. They disappear because entire networks decide they should. I looked at Daniel. My son looked terrified. The lawyer continued. Richard wanted your company. I was the legal architect. And your employees. He paused. Some were paid informants. The room went silent. I looked around. How many? He didn't answer. How many people inside my company were working for you? Enough. My heart sank. Years of trust, years of handshakes, years of believing I knew the people around me. And suddenly I didn't know anyone. Then Daniel stood. Where is the original guarantee? The lawyer looked at him. What? The physical document? There isn't one. Daniel shook his head. Yes, there is. The lawyer's expression changed. Daniel walked toward him. I saw it. When? 2 days ago. The lawyer stared at him. Daniel continued. You left it in your office. I looked at my son. You saw it? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wasn't sure. He reached into his jacket, then pulled out a photograph. The document was visible, and at the bottom was a signature. Not mine. Not my lawyer's. Not Michael's. Someone else's. The room became silent. My lawyer stared at the photograph. His face changed for the first time. Daniel noticed. You recognize it. The lawyer didn't answer. Who is it? Silence. I stepped forward. Tell me. He looked at me, then whispered, Your father. My heart stopped. What? Your father signed the original guarantee. I shook my head. My father died 10 years ago. Yes. Then how? The lawyer looked down. Because the guarantee wasn't created recently. What are you talking about? It was created 27 years ago. I couldn't breathe. Why? To protect the company. From what? He looked at me. From Edward. I froze. That doesn't make sense. It does. How? Edward wasn't your father's partner. I stared at him. He was his enemy. The room felt like it had tilted. Everything I had learned over the last few days suddenly seemed wrong. Edward, the trust, my father's letter, the 49% ownership, the takeover, all of it. My lawyer continued. Your father suspected Edward was trying to take control of the company. But Edward said he was protecting it. He lied. I shook my head. No, he manipulated you. Why? Because he needed your trust. I thought about the old photograph, the letter, the phone call, the story Edward had told me. Could all of it have been a lie? I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was piling up. Then Daniel said, Dad. I looked at him. There's something else. What? Edward's 49% isn't protected. I frowned. What do you mean? The trust documents were changed. Changed by whom? Daniel looked at my lawyer. He didn't answer. Daniel did. Edward. I felt my stomach drop. When? 3 years ago. That was the same year Michael entered my life. The same year the first investment offer appeared. The same year my son's business started receiving strange offers. 3 years. Everything connected. My lawyer picked up his phone. I think you should leave. I stared at him. Why? Because this building isn't safe. What? He looked toward the security camera. It has been compromised. The IT manager immediately checked the system. His face changed. We're being watched. Everyone froze. By whom? He pointed to the monitor. There, a live connection appeared. Someone was remotely accessing the building's cameras. Then the screen went black. A message should appear. Should have accepted the offer. Nobody moved. Then another message appeared. No, your son will pay for your decision. Daniel's face went pale. I immediately looked at him. What did you do? Nothing. Daniel? I swear. The screen changed again. A photograph appeared. Daniel standing outside my apartment, taken that morning. Another photograph, Daniel entering the bank. Another Daniel meeting Edward. Someone had been following him. Then the final photograph appeared. It showed Daniel standing beside his car. A red circle had been drawn around him. Underneath were 4 words. Is the lever. I felt something inside me break. I turned toward my son. For years, I had blamed him for destroying our family. Now someone else was trying to use him to destroy us again. But this time, I wasn't going to let it happen. We left the building immediately. My lawyer stayed behind with the police. I took Daniel to a safe location. He sat across from me. "I'm sorry." I looked at him. "For what?" "For putting you in this." "You didn't." "Yes, I did." "No." I shook my head. "This started before you were born." He looked confused. "What?" I told him what my lawyer had revealed. About my father, about Edward, about the trust, about the guarantee. Daniel listened, then he asked, "So who do we trust?" I thought about it. For the first time in my life, I didn't have an answer. Then Daniel said, "Maybe we don't trust anyone." I looked at him. "What?" "Maybe we trust evidence." I smiled. "That sounds like something your grandfather would have said." Daniel smiled. "Maybe I'm finally learning." That night we went back to the old workshop. The building had been closed for years. It was where my father had started everything. Dust covered the machines. Old tools hung on the walls. Photographs were still sitting in the office. Daniel walked slowly around the room. "This is where you started." "Yes." "You built all this." "My father did first." Daniel touched an old workbench. He must at the photographs. I wish I'd asked him more questions. Daniel turned toward me. "Why didn't you?" I smiled sadly. "Because I thought I had time." He looked down. "I know that feeling." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel noticed something. "Dad." "What?" He pointed toward the wall. "What's behind that?" I looked. There was an old metal cabinet. I hadn't opened it in decades. We pulled it away from the wall. Behind it was a small wooden door. I stared at it. "I've never seen that before." Daniel found an old key hanging from a nail. He inserted it. The lock clicked. Inside was a small safe, and on the safe was a handwritten note. My father's handwriting, "For Robert only." My hands trembled. Daniel stood beside me. "Open it." I entered the combination I remembered from childhood. My father's birthday. The safe opened. Inside was one envelope, one key, and one photograph. I picked up the photograph. My blood ran cold. It showed my father, Edward Michael's father, and another man, a man I recognized immediately, Richard Hale. All four were standing together 30 years ago. On the back of the photograph were 5 words. They all knew the truth. I looked at Daniel. He stared at the photograph. "Dad." I couldn't answer because now I knew one thing. This wasn't a new attack. It wasn't even Michael's plan. It had started with our fathers, and somehow the consequences had followed us for 3 decades. Then I noticed the key. It had a number engraved on it, 47. Daniel looked at me. "What's 47? I stared at the key. "I don't know." Then I remembered something. The old workshop had 48 storage units, except there had always been one missing. Number 47, my father had never explained why. We looked at each other. Daniel whispered, "Maybe that's where the truth is." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't afraid of what we might find. I was afraid of what we might lose after finding it. The key felt heavier than it should have. I held it between my fingers while Daniel stared at the number engraved on it, 47. Neither of us spoke for 30 years. That number had apparently been waiting for me. I looked around the abandoned workshop. Dust covered everything, the old machines, the shelves, the wooden desk where my father used to sit. But beneath all that dust was something else, a secret, and somehow my father had expected me to find it. "Come on," I said. Daniel followed me. We walked behind the workshop toward the old storage building. There were 48 units. I had known that since I was a child. But I had never questioned why number 47 was always locked. My father had simply told me, "Some things are better left alone." Back then, I had believed him. Now I understood that sometimes parents say things like that because they're afraid their children will discover the truth before they're ready. We stopped in front of the door, 47. I inserted the key. It turned immediately. The lock clicked. Daniel looked at me. "No." He smiled faintly. "Me neither." I opened the door. At first we saw nothing. The room was almost completely dark. I turned on my flashlight. Boxes, dozens of them. Some were labeled with dates, others had names. My father's handwriting covered most of them. Daniel stepped inside. "Dad." "What?" He pointed toward the back wall. There was a metal filing cabinet, and on top of it was a small black box. I walked toward it. My father's initials were engraved on the lid. RC. I opened it. Inside were 3 things: a cassette tape, a folder, and another photograph. I picked up the photograph first. It showed my father and Edward standing outside the original workshop. But this time, someone else was there, Richard Hale. Again, I turned it over. There was a date 989. Daniel looked at me. That's 37 years ago, I nodded. And Richard looks almost exactly the same. I stared at the photograph. He did, not literally unchanged, but close enough to make me uncomfortable. Then Daniel noticed something. Dad, what? Look at the folder. I opened it. The first page contained a list of names. My father's name, Edwards Richards, Michael's father's, then several others. But at the bottom was a name that made my heart stop. Robert Carter. My name. Why is my name here? He shook his head. I don't know. I kept reading. Next to each name were dates, transactions, meetings, aunts. And next to my name was a single note. He must never know. I felt a chill run through me. Daniel didn't answer. I flipped through the pages. The records continued for years: 989, 1990, 1991, 1992, 1993. Then, finally, 2016. The year my father died. I turned the page. There was only one sentence. After my death, Edward must protect Robert from the truth. I stared at it. Protect me from what? Daniel looked at me. Maybe the tape explains it. The cassette player still worked. Barely. Daniel found an old adapter. We inserted the tape, filled the room. Then my father's voice came through, older, tired, but unmistakably his. Robert. My entire body went still. I hadn't heard his voice in 10 years. Daniel sat beside me. My father's recording continued. If you're hearing this, then I'm no longer here. A pause. I hope you never have to hear this. Another pause. But if you do, it means the people I feared have finally come for you. Daniel looked at me. I couldn't move. My father's voice continued. I made many mistakes. I trusted the wrong people. I kept secrets from my family. And perhaps the greatest mistake I made was believing that silence could protect you. I closed my eyes. The recording continued. Robert, your company was never the real target. I opened my eyes. What? Daniel leaned closer. My father's voice continued. The real target is you. The tape crackled. I felt my stomach tighten. Not your money. Not your company, you. There was another pause then. Because you are the only person who can expose what they did. The tape stopped. Silence. Daniel looked at me. Dad, I rewound it. We listened again. Same words, same voice, same warning. My entire life suddenly felt different. Inside one was an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, Local businessman dies in mysterious accident. The man's name was Michael Grant's father. I stared at it. He died in an accident. Daniel nodded. That was what everyone said. I read the article. According to the report, his car had crashed on a mountain road. No witnesses, no clear explanation. The article said investigators had found no evidence of foul play, but my father had written something on the side. Not an accident. I looked at Daniel. This is getting worse. We found another document, a handwritten ledger, payments, names, bank accounts, political donations, bribes. My father had been documenting everything. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. One payment had been made to a hospital. The date was 30 years ago. The recipient was a young woman. Her name was unfamiliar, but beneath it was a note for Robert's protection. I stared at it. Who is she? Daniel took the paper. I don't know. I turned the page. There was an address. An address that still existed. The next morning, we drove there. It was a small house in a quiet neighborhood. An elderly woman answered the door. She looked at me, then froze. For several seconds, she simply stared. Finally, she whispered, Robert? I nodded. Do I know you? Her eyes filled with tears. No. She shook her head. But I knew your father. I felt a strange pressure in my chest. Who are you? My name is Susan. She opened the door wider. Come inside. Daniel and I entered. Susan sat across from us. She looked nervous. Your father paid my medical bills for several years. Why? Because he believed my husband had been murdered. I frowned. Who was your husband? She looked at me. David Bennett. I froze. Edward's brother. She nodded. Daniel looked at me. Edward had a brother. Yes. David worked with your father. What happened to him? He disappeared. When? 1989. The same year as the photograph. I felt a chill. Did Edward know? Yes. Then why did he say nothing? Susan's eyes filled with sadness. Because Edward was the reason David disappeared. I sat back. No. Yes. Why? Because David discovered the truth. What truth? Susan looked toward the window. Your father didn't own the company. I frowned. What? He thought he did. My head started spinning. Susan continued. Your father's company was financed by a private investment group. Which group? She whispered. Hale. Richard Hale's family. I stood. So my father was working for them? No. She shook her head. He tried to get away from them, but the ownership records. I looked at Daniel. Everything was collapsing again. The trust, Edward's 49%, my father's 51%, the company. All of it might have been built on documents designed to hide something much bigger. Susan stood and walked toward a cabinet. She opened a drawer. Inside was an old envelope. She handed it to me. Your father gave me this before he died. I looked at the envelope. Why didn't you give it to me before? Because he told me not to. Until when? Until Richard came for you. I felt my throat tighten. He came. She nodded. Then it's time. I opened the envelope. Inside was one page. My father's handwriting. Only 4 words were written. Richard is not the mastermind. I looked up. Susan was crying. Daniel stared at the page. I turned it over. Nothing. Then I noticed a second sheet hidden inside the envelope. It contained a name. Just one. I read it. And for several seconds I couldn't breathe, because the name belonged to someone who had been in my life for years. Someone who had never once appeared suspicious. Someone I had trusted more than almost anyone. I looked at Daniel. He saw my face. Who? I couldn't answer. He took the paper from my hand. Then his eyes widened. Dad, the person named on that paper wasn't Richard. It wasn't Edward. It wasn't Michael. It wasn't my lawyer. It was someone far closer. Someone who had been standing beside me while this entire nightmare unfolded. Someone who had known exactly where I would be. Exactly what I would do. Exactly what I would choose. And suddenly I understood why every trap had worked. They hadn't been predicting my decisions. They had been helping me make them. Daniel looked at me. What are we going to do? I folded the paper. We don't confront them. Why? Because whoever this is, I looked toward the door, has been waiting for us to discover the truth. Daniel nodded slowly. So we let them think we know nothing. Yes. He smiled. For the first time, I saw the old arrogance completely disappear from his face. What happens next? I looked at my son. Now we set a trap. But neither of us knew that the person we were planning to trap was already inside my house. I knew the person in that photograph. I had trusted him for years. Maybe that was why the truth felt worse than everything Michael had done. Michael had been a stranger. Richard had been an enemy. My lawyer had been a betrayal I never expected. But this person? This person had eaten at my table. He had stood beside me at family gatherings. He had held my hand when my father died. And he had a key to my house. I looked at Daniel. Don't say his name. Why? Because if we're right, someone may be listening. Daniel immediately looked around the room. Susan stared at us. What did you find? I folded the paper. Something dangerous. She nodded. Then you need to leave. We will. I stood, but before I looked at her. Did my father ever tell you why he trusted me? Susan smiled sadly. He said you were the only person in the family who still believed people could be good. I swallowed. And was he wrong? She looked at me for a long moment. No. Then she said something I'll never forget. He was afraid your goodness would become your weakness. We returned to the city without speaking much. Daniel drove. I stared out the window. The person whose name appeared on that paper had been around me for years. If I confronted him now, he would know we had discovered everything. And if he was connected to the people behind this, we might never get another chance. So I decided to do something difficult. I would pretend nothing had changed. When we arrived at my house, the front door was unlocked. I immediately stopped. I locked that. Daniel looked at me. Are you sure? I always lock it. We didn't enter. We stood outside. Then I noticed something. The security light was off. It had been working that morning. Daniel whispered, I see it. He reached for his phone. Don't. Why? Because if someone is inside, we don't want them to know we're outside. We walked around the side of the house. There was a second entrance. The door was slightly open. I looked at Daniel. He nodded. We entered quietly. The house was dark. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Then I noticed a glass on the kitchen counter. I had washed every glass before leaving. Someone had been inside. Daniel pointed toward the hallway. A bedroom door was open. My bedroom. We walked toward it. The drawers had been opened. My desk had been searched, but nothing looked stolen. Then I understood. They weren't looking for money. They were looking for information. I walked to the desk. The envelope from Susan was still there, but the old photograph was gone. My father's photograph, the one from 1989. Someone had taken it, Daniel whispered. They know. I nodded. Now we know too. We called the police. They searched the house. No one was there. No forced entry, no fingerprints, no useful camera footage. The officer looked at me. Do you have any idea who might have done this? I almost laughed. Yes, but I couldn't say the name. Not yet, because suspicion wasn't proof, and I had already trusted the wrong people too many times. That evening, I called the person I suspected. He answered immediately. Robert? His voice sounded completely normal. Where are you? At home. I looked at Daniel. I'm coming over. Why? I need to talk. Of course. I hung up. Daniel stared at me. You're going alone? Yes. No, Daniel. You said we don't trust anyone. I didn't say I don't trust you, he smiled. Then I'm coming. I nodded. We arrived 30 minutes later. He opened the door. He looked surprised to see Daniel. What's going on? He invited us inside. The house looked exactly the same. Photographs, furniture, books. Everything. We sat down. He poured coffee. My hands remained still. His didn't. Only slightly. But I noticed. Robert? Yes? You look worried. I am. About among other things. He nodded. I've been concerned about you. I appreciate that. He looked at Daniel. And you? Daniel smiled. I'm fine. Silence. Then I said someone broke into my house. His expression changed. Really? Yes. When? Today. That's terrible. Nothing was stolen. He frowned. Then what did they want? I watched him carefully. An old photograph. He froze just for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. What photograph? I leaned my father. He looked away. Why would anyone want that? That's what I'm trying to figure out. He took a sip of coffee. Maybe it was random. No. I smiled. It wasn't. Daniel remained silent. Then I asked, did you know my father worked with Edward? His hand stopped. Of course. Did you know about the trust? Yes. Did you know about Project Evergreen? He stared at me. No, I smiled. Good. He relaxed. That was the mistake. He relaxed too quickly. Because I hadn't actually asked him if he knew. I had told him had reacted. We left after 20 minutes. As soon as we reached the car, Daniel said, he's involved. I know. Did you see his reaction? Yes. What do we do now? Follow him. Daniel looked surprised. You want to follow him? No. I handed him my phone. Someone else will. I had already contacted a private investigator. He had been waiting nearby. Within minutes, the investigator followed our suspect. We watched from a distance. The man drove downtown, then to an office building, then into an underground parking garage. 20 minutes later, another car arrived. A black SUV. Richard Hale stepped out. My heart sank. They spoke for several minutes. Then Michael Grant appeared. I felt anger rise. 3 men, 1 meeting, and all of them connected to my life. But then something happened that none of us expected. A 4th man arrived. He was older, gray hair, walking slowly. I couldn't see his face clearly. Then he turned. I froze. Daniel looked at me. What? I pointed. Edward. We watched Edward enter the building. Daniel stared. But he told us he was protecting you. I know. He's meeting Richard. I know. And Michael. Daniel looked at me. Then Edward betrayed us. I didn't answer because something inside me still resisted. Maybe it was denial. Maybe it was hope. Maybe I simply didn't want to believe that every person connected to my father's story had lied to me. Then the investigator called. Robert. Yes, I need you to hear this. He had managed to place a listening device in the building's hallway. The audio wasn't perfect, but Richard spoke first. The trust expires in 17 days. Edward answered. I know. Michael said. Then we're ready. I felt my hands tighten. Richard continued. What about Robert? Edward's voice was calm. He still doesn't understand. My heart dropped. Daniel looked at me. Then Richard asked, and the boy? Edward paused. Daniel is the key. I felt something break inside me. My son looked devastated. Richard continued. Once Daniel signs the transfer, Robert loses control. Daniel whispered. Edward replied. He will. Why? Because he's his son. The recording continued. He'll sacrifice the company to save him. Silence. Then Michael laughed. Just like we planned. I closed my eyes. Everything became clear. They weren't trying to force me to sell. They were trying to create a situation where I would voluntarily give up control. And Daniel was the final piece. We drove home in silence. Daniel stared through the windshield. Finally he said, I thought Edward cared about you. So did I. I thought he was protecting you. He looked at me. I'm sorry. I shook my head. This isn't your fault. Yes, it is. No. If I hadn't, Daniel. He stopped. I turned toward him. For the first time in your life, I need you to listen to me. He nodded. You are not the reason this happened. But no. I took a breath. You made mistakes, he nodded. But these people chose to exploit them. He looked at me. Now we stop them. How? I smiled. We let them think they won. Daniel frowned. What? We give them exactly what they want. He stared at me. You're going to surrender? No. I leaned closer. I'm going to make them believe I am. The next morning I called Richard. He answered immediately. Robert, I've made a decision. There was silence. I'll accept your offer. Richard didn't speak, then he laughed. I knew you'd come around. You'll get the 49% and the sign. Good. There's one condition. What? I want Daniel protected. Richard laughed again. Of course. No, I interrupted him. I want it in writing. You have my word. I don't trust your word. Silence. He agreed. The documents would be prepared. I hung up. Daniel looked at me.
Do you really think they'll believe you?
Yes. Why? Because they think they know me. He smiled. And they don't. No. I looked at the documents. They think I'm still the man who walked away from his son's house with nothing. I paused. But they don't know what happened to that man. Daniel smiled. He became successful. I looked at him. No. I shook my head. He became patient. For the next 10 days we played the part. I acted defeated. I told employees we might have to restructure. I met with Richard's representatives. I signed preliminary documents. I even allowed them to believe Daniel was preparing to transfer his remaining interests. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. But behind the scenes, my lawyer's replacement was building a case. The investigator collected recordings. The IT team recovered deleted files. Edward's meetings were documented. Michael's financial transfers were traced. Richard's shell companies were identified. And most importantly, we found the original trust agreement, the real one. Not the altered version, the original. It contained a clause nobody knew about. A clause my father had written himself. If anyone attempted to acquire the company through fraud, coercion, or manipulation, all ownership rights would immediately transfer to a protected foundation, and the person who controlled that foundation. I stared at the document. Then I smiled because, for the first time, I wasn't waiting for them to make a move. They were walking directly into my trap. 17 days had become 7. 7 became 3. And on the final morning, Richard arrived at my office. Edward came with him. Michael stood behind them. They placed the final agreement on my desk. Richard smiled. Mr. Carter. He pushed the pen toward me. It's time. I looked at the document, then at Daniel. My son stood beside me. He looked nervous, but he wasn't afraid. I picked up the pen. Richard smiled. Edward watched. Michael looked confident. I placed the pen on the paper, then stopped. You know, I said quietly, my father once told me something. Richard frowned. What? I looked directly at Edward. He said, never trust the person who gives you answers. Edward's face changed. I smiled. Trust the person who makes you ask questions. I pushed the agreement back. And I have a lot of questions. The room went silent. Then the conference room doors opened. 3 investigators walked in. Behind them were federal agents. Richard's face went white. Michael stepped backward. Edward froze. And I finally said the words I had been waiting years to say. You wanted my company. I stood. But you forgot one thing. I looked at my son. You were never dealing with a helpless old man. I turned back toward them. You were dealing with his son. And for the first time, I wasn't the one being trapped. They were. For several seconds, nobody moved. Richard stared at the federal agents. Michael looked at Edward. Edward looked at me. And my son stood beside me, completely silent. One of the agents stepped forward. Richard Hale? Richard swallowed. Yes. You're being investigated for financial fraud, conspiracy, wire fraud, and attempted unlawful acquisition of a privately held company. Michael immediately stepped forward. This is a misunderstanding. The agent looked at him. Michael Grant? Yes, you need to step back. Michael stopped. Edward didn't say anything. He simply stared at me. Finally, he whispered. I almost laughed. No, I shook my head. You betrayed yourself. His face hardened. You have no idea what I've sacrificed. I looked at him. Neither did my father. That silenced him. For 30 years, Edward had hidden behind the story that he was protecting my family. But now the truth was finally standing in the same room with us. And it was ugly. My replacement lawyer entered behind the investigators. He placed a large folder on the table. Everything is here. Richard's attorney immediately objected. You can't simply, the lead investigator interrupted. We have warrants. He handed over the documents, financial records, communications, bank transfers, digital evidence. Richard looked at me. How? I smiled. You spent so much time watching me, I paused. You forgot I could watch you too. Michael's face turned pale. The investigator opened the first folder. 16 shell companies. Another. 23 unauthorized transfers. Another 38 communications involving the planned acquisition of Carter Industrial. Then he placed a final file on the table. Project Evergreen. Original. Richard stared at it. That document doesn't exist. I smiled. It does now. Daniel stepped forward. Michael looked at him. You. Daniel didn't move. You ruined everything. Michael laughed. No, he shook his head. You ruined yourself. Daniel's expression didn't change. I know. That answer seemed to surprise Michael. You know? Yes, Daniel looked directly at him. I made terrible decisions. I was arrogant. I was selfish. I treated my father like he was worthless. Michael smiled. So you admit it? Daniel nodded. I do. Then he looked at me. But I won't let you use my mistakes to hurt him anymore. Michael's smile disappeared. For years I had wanted my son to become successful. Then I wanted him to become humble. Now I realized something. Success wasn't the measure of a man, neither was money. The real measure was what he did after realizing he had been wrong. And for the first time, I was proud of him. Richard's attorney tried to stop the investigation. He demanded to know what evidence we had. My lawyer calmly placed the documents on the table. The original trust agreement. The attorney looked at it, then at Richard. This changes the ownership structure. Yes, you can't transfer these shares. No. Why? Because the trust was designed specifically to prevent fraudulent acquisition. Richard stood. This is nonsense. My lawyer shook his head. No, he pointed to the clause. It's legally binding. Richard turned toward me. You knew? Yes. When? 3 days ago. His face changed. Then why did you pretend to accept my offer? Because I needed you to put everything in writing. Richard stared at me. You manipulated me. I smiled. No, I gave you exactly what you wanted. He looked confused. What? I gave you confidence. I leaned forward. You made the mistake yourself. The room became quieter. Then Edward finally spoke. You don't understand. Explain. He walked toward me. My father built this network. I frowned. Your father? Yes. Edward's voice became bitter. He started it before any of us understood what it would become. What network? Private acquisitions, manipulated debt, shell companies, hostile takeovers. He looked at Richard. Your father learned from him. Then at Michael. Your father taught him. I felt sick. So this has been happening for generations. Yes. Why my father? Because he refused to participate. Edward's eyes filled with anger. He believed businesses should belong to the people who built them. I stared at him. Then why did you betray him? Edward looked away. Because I was weak. That was the first honest thing he had said. I wanted money. He swallowed. Your father wanted freedom, and I chose money. I looked at him. Did you cause my father's death? Edward's face changed. No, then who did? I don't know. You're lying. No. He shook his head. I'm not. The investigator stepped closer. Edward Bennett, we're going to need you to come with us. Edward looked at me one last time. You'll never understand, I replied quietly. Maybe not. But my father died believing you betrayed him. Edward closed his eyes. And he died believing I was the reason. I stared at him. Were you? Edward didn't answer. The investigators took him away. When the room finally emptied, only Daniel and I remained. For the first time in months, there was no enemy standing between us. No lawsuit, no threat, no business emergency, just father and son down. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. He looked at me. I almost destroyed your life. You made mistakes. I hurt you. Yes. He lowered his eyes. I don't expect you to forget. I won't. He looked up. That answer surprised him. I continued. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Then what does it mean? I thought for a moment. It means I stop allowing the past to control the future. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Do you forgive me? I looked at him. He covered his face. For several seconds he cried. Then he stood and hugged me. I hugged him back, not because everything had suddenly become perfect. It hadn't. But because sometimes forgiveness is not about returning to the way things were. Sometimes it's about accepting that things can become something different, something healthier, something more honest. 3 weeks later, the investigation expanded. Michael's accounts were frozen. Richard's investment group was placed under scrutiny. Several shell companies were shut down. Employees who had cooperated with investigators were protected. The financial fraud case became much larger than my company. News outlets began reporting on the network. But I refused interviews. I didn't want fame. I had spent too many years watching people chase money. I had learned something different. Money could buy comfort. It could buy buildings. It could buy lawyers. It could even buy loyalty for a while. But it couldn't buy back time. It couldn't buy back trust. And it certainly couldn't buy back a relationship between a father and son. One afternoon, Daniel came into my office. "I have something for you." He placed a small box on my desk. "What is it?" Inside was my old house key. I stared at it. The key I had carried for years. The key to the home where my son had once told me I was a burden. I looked at him. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because I don't want you to forget." "Forget what?" "That you don't owe me a home." I stared at him, he continued. "If you ever live with me again, I want it to be because you choose to." I nodded slowly. That sentence meant more than any apology. Because he finally understood. Love isn't ownership. Family isn't entitlement. And being someone's father doesn't mean allowing yourself to be disrespected. 6 months passed. The company recovered. Our customers returned. The employees received bonuses. The legal restrictions disappeared, and the business grew stronger than before. Daniel began working with me, not as my replacement, not as the owner, as my partner. He learned the business from the ground up. He spent time with employees. He visited customers. He worked long hours. And every once in a while, I would catch him doing something that reminded me of myself. He would stop, look at a problem, think, then ask someone for advice. That last part was the difference. He had learned to ask. One evening, we stood outside the original workshop. The sun was setting. Daniel looked at the building. "You know what I used to think?" "What?" "That this place represented everything you had." I smiled. "And now I think it represents everything you survived." "That sounds wiser." He laughed. "I'm getting old." I laughed too. Then he became serious. "Yes, do you regret leaving my house?" I thought about it. "No." He looked surprised. "Why not?" "Because if I hadn't left," I paused, "I might never have become the man I am today." He nodded. "And if I hadn't thrown you out, I might never have become the man I am today." We stood in silence, two men, both changed by the same painful night. Then Daniel asked the question I knew was coming. "Would you ever live with me again?" I looked at him. He wasn't asking because he needed help. He wasn't asking because he wanted my money. He was asking because he wanted his father close. I smiled. Maybe he smiled, that's not a no. "No." He laughed. "But it's not a yes. Not yet." He nodded. "I understand," and that was enough because forgiveness had happened. But trust still needed time, and I wasn't going to rush it. A year later, we stood in the same office where everything had almost fallen apart. Daniel handed me a document. "What is this?" "The new ownership agreement." I read it, then looked up. "You're giving me majority control?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because it's your company." I smiled. "I thought we were partners." "We are." Then he looked at me. "Because you built it." I shook my head. "We built it." He smiled. "No." He pointed toward the window. "You built the foundation. I'm just trying to make sure I don't destroy it." I laughed. "That's progress." He smiled, then his expression became serious. "Dad?" "Yes?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For walking away." I frowned. He continued. "If you had stayed, I might never have realized what I was doing." I looked at my son. For years I had believed walking away from him was the most painful thing I had ever done. Now I understood. Sometimes leaving isn't abandonment. Sometimes leaving is the only way to teach someone the value of your presence. That night, I went home alone. I placed the old house key on my desk. I looked at it for a long time. Then I put it into a drawer, not because I hated what happened, not because I wanted to forget, but because I no longer needed to carry it. My son had apologized. I had forgiven him. Our relationship had changed, but I never moved back into his house. I didn't need to. I had my own home, my own company, my own life. And most importantly, I had something I hadn't had on the night I walked away: peace. I had once believed my son's rejection meant I was worthless. I was wrong. His rejection didn't define me. His apology didn't define me either. What defined me was what I chose to do after being hurt. I could have stayed angry. I could have spent the rest of my life trying to punish him. Instead, I built something. I built a company. I rebuilt my dignity. And eventually, I rebuilt a relationship with my son. Not the relationship we had before, something better. One evening, Daniel called. "Dad?" "Yes?" "I love you." There was a long silence, then I smiled. "I love you too." He laughed. "Good night." "Good night, son." I hung up, then I looked out the window. The city lights were shining in the distance. I thought about the night I had walked out of his house with one suitcase. I had believed I was leaving everything behind, but I wasn't. I was leaving behind the version of myself who believed he had to tolerate disrespect just because he was a father. And when I walked away, I didn't lose my family. I finally found myself. And years later, when my son came looking for forgiveness, I gave it to him. But I didn't give him my dignity again, because forgiveness is a gift. Trust is something you earn. And sometimes loving someone means forgiving them, while still choosing to live your own life. 2 years had passed since the night everything changed. 2 years since I had stood in that conference room and watched the people who tried to destroy my company finally face the consequences of their actions. 2 years since my son had looked at me and asked for forgiveness, and 2 years since I had given it to him. But forgiveness didn't erase the past. It simply stopped the past from controlling my future. My company was stronger than ever. The employees who had stayed with me during the crisis had become more than employees. They were family. The business had expanded into 3 new states. We had opened a second headquarters, and Daniel had become one of the most important people in the company, not because he was my son, because he had earned it. That distinction mattered to both of us. I never gave him a position because of his last name. He started at the bottom. He worked with warehouse employees. He learned accounting. He spent months visiting customers. He answered complaints. He made mistakes. And when he made them, he admitted them. That was the part that made me proud. The arrogant young man who once believed his father was a burden had disappeared. In his place stood a man who understood the value of humility. One Friday evening, Daniel came into my office. He had a folder under his arm. "Dad," I looked up. "Yes, can we talk?" I smiled. "Of course." He sat down for a few seconds. He said nothing. Then he placed the folder on my desk. "I bought a house." "You bought a house?" "Yes." "Why?" He smiled. "Because I'm tired of renting." I laughed. "That's a better reason." He shook his head. "There's more." I waited. "I want you to have a room there." I stared at him. "Daniel, just listen." I leaned back. He continued. "I know you don't want to move in with me. I appreciate that you understand." "I do." He nodded. "But I want you to know something. What, you will always have a place there." I smiled. "Thank you. You don't have to use it." "I know. You don't even have to visit." I laughed. "I might." He smiled. "Good." Then his expression became serious. "I don't want to repeat what I did before." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I don't ever want you to feel like you're a burden." I felt something tighten in my chest. "Daniel." "No." He shook his head. "I need to say this." He looked down. "When you lived with me, I treated your presence like an inconvenience. I know. I complained about everything. I know. I let Melissa disrespect you. I didn't interrupt. And the worst part," he looked up. "I convinced myself I was right. I thought because it was my house, I had the right to make you feel small." I nodded slowly. "That was the mistake." "Yes." He wiped his eyes. "I understand now that a house doesn't make someone powerful. Character does. That's what you always told me." I should have listened. I looked at him. "You finally did." He stood. Then he walked toward me. I expected another hug. Instead, he did something different. He extended his hand. I looked at it, then at him. "What is this?" "What kind? That I will never confuse your forgiveness with permission to hurt you again." I stared at his hand. Then I shook it. "That's a promise worth making." He smiled. And for some reason that simple handshake meant more to me than all the apologies he had ever given. Because an apology says, "I'm sorry for what I did." A promise says, "I understand why it was wrong." There is a difference. Later that night, I drove home alone. My house was quiet. I made myself coffee. Then I sat by the window. On the table was an old photograph, my son as a little boy, maybe 8 years old. He was sitting on my shoulders. We were both laughing. I looked at the photograph for a long time. That little boy had once believed his father could do anything. Then he grew up. Life changed him. Money changed him. Pride changed him. And for a while he forgot the man carrying him. But eventually, he remembered. I smiled. Maybe that's what growing up really means. Not becoming independent from your parents, but finally understanding what they sacrificed for you. The following Sunday, Daniel invited me for dinner. I almost said no. Not because I didn't want to see him, but because I wanted to make sure our relationship didn't return to the old pattern. I wanted him to understand that forgiveness didn't mean moving backward. It meant moving forward differently, so I went. When I arrived, Daniel opened the door. "Come in." I stepped inside. His wife wasn't there. I asked about her. She moved out. I looked at him. "When?" "Months ago." "Are you okay?" He smiled. "Yes." Then he added, "I finally realized being alone is better than being with someone who doesn't respect the people I love." I nodded. That was another lesson he had learned. We sat at the dinner table. He had cooked badly. I took one bite. He watched me nervously. "Well?" I swallowed. "You need a new career." For the first time in years, we laughed together without anything hanging over us. No guilt, no anger, no business, no money. Just father and son. After dinner, Daniel walked me to my car. He stood beside the door. "Dad, yes, I've been thinking. That can be dangerous." He laughed, then became serious. "Do you think Mom would be proud of us?" I looked away. His mother had passed many years ago. She had always wanted us to stay close. I smiled. "Yes, how do you know?" "Because she always believed people could change." Daniel nodded. "I wish she could see us now." "So do I." He hugged me, then whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I closed my eyes. "I almost did." He pulled away. I looked at him. "You did?" He smiled. "Me?" "Yes, you were the one who walked away." I nodded. "But you were the one who came looking for me." He looked down. I was ashamed. "I know. I didn't think you'd forgive me. I wasn't sure I would." I smiled. "But then I realized something." "What?" "If I carried hatred forever, you'd still be controlling my life." He nodded slowly. "So forgiveness was for you?" "No." I looked at him. Forgiveness was for me. That night I drove home thinking about that sentence. It was the truth. For years I had thought forgiving my son meant doing something for him. It didn't. It freed me. I didn't have to replay that night anymore. I didn't have to remember his words every morning. I didn't have to wonder whether I had failed as a father. I had done what I could. I had loved him. I had provided for him. I had given him chances. And when he crossed a line that no father should have to tolerate, I walked away. That wasn't revenge. That was self-respect. And sometimes self-respect is the most important lesson you can teach someone you love. 3 months later, Daniel came to me with another surprise. He wanted to create a foundation. "What kind of foundation?" "For older people." I looked at him. He explained, "We'll help elderly people who have been abandoned by their families." I stared at him. "How much?" He smiled. $5 million to start." "Yes." "Why?" He looked at me. "Because I know what it feels like to realize too late that someone you loved was suffering." I felt my eyes become wet. "That's a good idea." He nodded. "We'll call it the Carter Family Foundation." I smiled. "Family?" "Yes." I looked at him. "That's a big word." "I know." He smiled. "I think we've earned it." I couldn't argue with that. Years passed. The foundation grew. Hundreds of elderly people received assistance. Some received housing. Some received medical support. Some simply received companionship. And every Christmas, Daniel and I would visit a different center. We never announced ourselves. We never took photographs for publicity. We simply showed up. Because we had both learned something. People don't always need money. Sometimes they need someone to sit beside them. Someone to listen, someone to remind them they still matter. One Christmas morning, an elderly man took my hand. "Thank you," he said. I smiled. "Don't thank me." He looked confused. "Thank my son." Daniel stood several feet away. The man looked at him. "Your son?" "Yes, he's a good man." I looked at Daniel. "Yes, he is." One evening, many years after that terrible night, Daniel and I stood outside the original workshop again. The same place where I had discovered my father's secrets. The same place where I had learned that people could betray you. The same place where I had found the courage to fight back. Daniel looked at the building. "You know what?" "What?" "I used to think your greatest achievement was this company." I smiled. "It's not?" "No." He looked at me. "It's me." I laughed. "That's a pretty big claim." He smiled. "I mean it." He paused. "You built a company. But you built a man." I didn't know what to say, so I simply put my hand on his shoulder. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Dad." "Yes." "I'm glad you walked away." I looked at him. "So am I." And that was the truth. Because if I had stayed that night, maybe I would have kept my home. Maybe I would have avoided humiliation. Maybe I would have protected my pride. But I might never have discovered what I was capable of. I might never have built the company. I might never have earned my son's respect, and I might never have understood that love without boundaries can become self-destruction. I still visit Daniel. He still visits me. We celebrate birthdays together, we have dinner, we argue about business, we laugh, we sometimes disagree. But there is one thing we never do anymore. We never take each other for granted, because once you've lost someone emotionally, getting them back teaches you something. You don't assume they're staying. You don't assume they'll forgive you. You don't assume blood gives you unlimited chances. You earn every relationship, every day. Sometimes people ask me what happened after I left my son's house. They expect a story about money. They expect revenge. They expect me to say I became rich and made my son regret everything. But that's not the real story. Yes, I built a successful company. Yes, I became wealthy. Yes, the people who tried to destroy me eventually faced justice. But none of that was my greatest victory. My greatest victory was walking away without becoming bitter. It was rebuilding without becoming cruel. It was forgiving my son without forgetting what happened. And it was learning that I didn't need his approval to know my own worth. I keep that old house key in a drawer. Sometimes I take it out, I look at it, then I put it back. It reminds me of the man I used to be. A man who thought being a father meant tolerating anything. A man who believed walking away meant losing. A man who thought his value depended on whether his own family respected him. I know better now. Walking away didn't destroy my family. It gave my son the chance to understand what he had lost. And when he finally came back, I didn't punish him. I forgave him, but I didn't move back into his house. Because forgiveness doesn't require you to return to the place where you were hurt. Sometimes you forgive someone and then build a better life somewhere else. That's exactly what I did. And if there's one thing I want anyone listening to this story to remember, it's this. Never confuse forgiveness with weakness. You can forgive someone and still have boundaries. You can love your children and still walk away when they disrespect you. You can lose everything and still rebuild, and sometimes the hardest door you'll ever close is the one that leads to the life you thought you were supposed to live. I closed that door years ago, and behind it I left the pain. Ahead of me, I found my purpose, I found my dignity, I found peace, and eventually, I found my son again, not as the arrogant young man who once called me a burden, but as the man who finally understood the value of having a father. And when he asked me for forgiveness, I gave it to him, not because he deserved to forget what he had done, but because I deserved to stop carrying it. That was my real victory, not the company, not the money, not the revenge. Freedom, and sometimes, the greatest revenge against the people who made you feel worthless is simply becoming someone who no longer needs their approval.